Just checking audio for the live stream. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Councillor Braithwaite.
And Councillor Smart.
We can hear you loud and clear here. We're just waiting for the video to buffer so we can start the meeting. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Special Committee of the Whole meeting for Thursday, March the 13th. My name is Kevin Murdoch. We are gathering here in the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and Kasapsum or Esquimalt nations. And just acknowledging their historical connections to these lands and adjoining waters continues to this day. First order of business is approval of the agenda. I just ask that we we approve the agenda with the approval to provide the opportunity for public input, which is not part of most normal special committee of the whole meetings. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda with that amendment? Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. My mayor's remarks are fairly simple. The budget tonight is starting out at around 13.5%, and that cost, I just want to acknowledge, reflects realistically the running of our organization and costs inflation that we are facing. We are also tasked as a body with working to ensure the residents and businesses are getting maximal value for their tax dollars. So that's the hard work in front of us tonight. Procedurally, for those in the audience, either online or in person, we'll be getting a presentation from our Director of Finance and Asset Management, Randall Lachance. After that, we will have the opportunity to perhaps have a couple of additional clarifications or pieces if anybody else wishes to speak from staff. We'll come to this table, we'll go to questions for clarification. We will then go to the public and seek public input at that time. If there's any, you're welcome to provide either comments or questions. If you are online, you can come into the Zoom that's in the agenda package and use the React button to raise your hand, and we will invite you to the meeting. If you're unable to, for example, if you're watching on YouTube and you want to just use your phone, you can call the 1-855 number. That's in the agenda, and at that point you hit *9. That is *9, not #9, to raise your hand, and we will be able to invite you into the meeting at that point. So as we get there, I just want to say we got lots of work ahead of it, so let's get to it. Ms. Lachance.
Thank you. Funny throat, so I apologize. I'm feeling absolutely fine. Hopefully I'll shake it off as I get warmed up. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am welcoming you to our second session of budget deliberations on the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. I'm pleased, honored to be here, and I'm also pleased to be joined again by my esteemed colleagues. This is quite a table put together to support the conversation tonight, and we're happy to be here. Also, I wanted to just point out for Mayor and Council, also newly joining us this evening is our new Manager of Financial Operations, Kanchana Sankar. She's just behind me to the right. And she'll be getting to know the district quite a bit. She's just only recently joined us. The approach this evening is to complete the presentation and bring back those items for further discussion as directed by Council at the end of last week's meeting. Staff are also seeking Council's direction on a number of items, and so have come prepared to track the discussion and any amendments to budget. As appropriate, we plan to keep a running total. The staff recommendation is for receipt of the report, approval of the financial plan, and to direct staff to prepare the legislated financial plan bylaw. As some brief opening remarks, the financial plan presented has been prepared in alignment with Council priorities and Council direction received to date. And it has been prepared in current planning frameworks and policies. The budget represents a period of investment for the district, as continued commitment to address critical and community infrastructure which has reached end of life. This is what all the hard work of saving that Council has been doing was 4. Council has made significant headway improving contributions to community assets significantly since 2017. While this is so, deliberations on this budget are particularly challenging. Investing in a time of great economic uncertainty as a result of swiftly evolving trade conditions, cost pressures, and likely supply disruptions. Not ideal. Staff do continue to monitor this situation and have a council report drafted on particular actions we may take. Council will receive that in the coming days. Staff believe this budget allows us to keep the momentum on the pattern of investment, and we look forward to discussion this evening. With that, I'll jump into the presentation and table of contents. I will stay on top of the slides, I promise you, Mayor. I have broken the short presentation into 3 sections. Just going to start off with a recap of what we covered, very short, I do promise. And then we'll move into a few slides I didn't have a chance to cover at our last meeting. They're just really circling us back to revenue and a number of taxation mitigation options. And then we'll move into saving the majority of the time tonight for the items for more discussion. The next slide is just to refresh us where we're at in the process. You'll note that we are in the sort of moving into the right quadrant of this graphic. We are completing our budget deliberations in preparation for the financial plan bylaw approval, the final approval scheduled for April, and the tax rate bylaw, which must be in place and approved by May 15th. We have as a recap, just a few talking points here. At the March 6th Committee of the Whole meeting, received the full financial plan package and presentation covering the consolidated plan, presentations by each of the departments, both on operating and capital. There were all correspondence received to date included in the package. As well, Council provided directions to come back. We have themed in shorthand here how we've interpreted those requests. I would like to start by saying that if we've misinterpreted anything, we're happy to clarify and add as much as we can this evening. But this is how we have packaged the last half of the presentation tonight. We'll be going over the new requests. Those would be the items that are budget requests from staff from each of the departments. And they're itemized by department. Heading into a deeper look at the 5-year borrowing plan and details around principal and interest, and also what projects are directly being funded by debt. And then that helps us dovetail into the last item, which is the risk and certainty in the plan that's been prepared. And the last recap slide that I have here is just to bring back to Council's attention the request directly from the Urban Wildlife Stewardship Society, directly to Council for $24,000 to continue their research. If Council wishes to include this as an authorized expenditure in this plan, we will need direction to that effect. It could be to include that in the existing budget as identified, the Deer Management operating line item, or it could be to add a new expenditure authority for that into the plan. Either way, we would need direction. And then I would also, just for note, suggest that the direction could include for staff to continue to pursue the provincial funding aspect of that previous program. So I'll just take a brief pause there and just check in if that approach sounds okay with Mayor and Council, if there's anything that we would want to amend or add.
Continue.
Just bringing back up a slide you're familiar with from our last presentation, important to take a look at all the funding sources from a high level as we drill in and look at tax options. This is just a reminder that the total funding from all sources is $132 million to offset that same amount of expenditures. The 2 largest contributors to the work that we do all year will be the transfers from reserve and also the taxation revenue. This is notable. We always want to be watching the diversification and the mix on funding sources that we're using to execute on the community services each year. Focusing in on the light blue on that slide, 31% of that funding source is taken up by taxation. Excuse me. And you'll recognize this slide. Yes?
Sorry, just going back one, what is the debt proceeds? There's a debt proceeds of $6 million on that slide. Where is that actually coming from? 6.6 million.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. That's an excellent question. So we frame the funding sources here as total funding to get us to a balanced budget. So the 6.6 million would be planned borrowings from MFA that would offset our capital expenditures. So if I had the sister slide, you'd see the just over 50 million in planned capital expenditures that would fund.
Perfect, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
And just to share a little funny there, I always have to remind myself as well, because it's a cash flow and not necessarily an operating item that you'd expect. Yeah. So the next slide you're familiar with, I bring this back to focus us in on the change in taxation revenue. That is totaling 4.9 million in our draft, as mentioned at the start through the chair, and a total increase of 13.5%. The drivers are over to the right side of the table. You'll see the change in articulated by budget driver. And you'll also see the percentage as well as the cost per household. And you'll also, just using the graph, it helps you understand the relative size of each of those drivers for decision making. This is the slide that Council hasn't seen yet. It is the 5-year projected tax increases. And I appreciate that the tables on the bottom are a bit small. The package has been provided on your iPads as part of the agenda, as well as printed out for you. And the darker gray is the prior year plan and shows you each of the 5 years. And then you can sort of compare that to how our new 5-year plan is shaping up. I, of course, being new, would have been watching to make sure that we are continuing to do multi-year planning based on commitments previously made to council. So I draw comfort from seeing that the 2025 is in line with the just around 13% increase. And then I also take a look at that 5-year average at 9.6%. And note that that would be the 5-year average that's very consistent with the previous plan. With just under 10% average per year, Council's been able to meaningfully address that asset funding crisis that the district has been confronting. The target is to get to sustainable funding levels, and we're partway through that program. And Council's also, with that sort of give or take 10% average, been able to support operational capacity to meet priorities. So also this slide, so these are the tax options that we've put together. This is very much in keeping with previous practice of Mayor and Council in terms of doing everything we can to mitigate tax increases. I would say that each of these items are very reasonable in terms of financial management practices. In fact, it's included in our guidelines with financial planning to use one-time funding sources against one-time costs. I'm just going to go through each item. Of course, please jump in and stop me if you need anything more. I do pause just after this slide for additional questions. So the first item is the non-market change. The calculated assessment roll non-market change for 2025 is 167,000. That's up from the previous year's 100,000. This amount has increased and increasing probably as expected with more activity in the district for improvements and new building. Typically, and this is just theoretically, just to help council understand why that amount's always stripped out of assessments, is it helps the district know where new buildings or new growth will be putting pressure on community services. And so it's considered new revenue and could be possibly transferred direct to reserve, or in history for the district, it's been a very small amount. So very reasonable to also offset taxation in that case. The next item is a short-term, it is multi-year, but it is considered a short-term increase in cost or a cost driver. The estimate here is $250,000 that we are going to experience and already have received formal notification of that to cover those costs in 2025. We do expect that that elevated cost driver will decrease in approximately 2 to 3 years. So we would have to confront the decision again next year, but this would be a reasonable amount to consider, particularly since Council has committed monies to financial stability reserve. And that this is a good example of where we don't want to see spikes in revenue for items that may smooth out over time. And the last item there is basically an accumulation of its and bits, I'll call it. So they're one-time amounts that are in the budget. I can give you a couple of examples on that. All I've done here is added them together and put them for consideration for matching that to a one-time funding source. As I said, very good financial management practice to do that, and is a notable amount this year. So a couple of examples there are that the new requests that we will go through tonight have related equipment purchases and workstation setup. I will mention that not every position there has a workstation setup, but we will go through that. But where there is those additional one-time costs, they've been added into this total. Another example is the budgeting software previously talked about last week would be a one-time cost that could be offset. So just to wrap that slide up, Council could choose to motion 1, 2, or 3, or all 3 options. Just for reference for the group, I've got the total of $579,000 there, or 1.6% offset. And I'll pause there for any questions or comments.
Sure. Are there any questions for staff on that? Go ahead, Councillor Watson, then Patterson.
The non-market change, I do understand what you're suggesting.
Can you go back one slide, please, just so we can speak to it on the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
And it may just be my lack of budget skills, but with respect to like WorkSafe Premium, for example, they must invoice us. So there is some invoiced amount that we're expecting. So by reducing that, how do we then address the shortfall in our budget? Where actually is that one-time reduction taken from in order to meet that obligation? Because I am not quite following the math.
Sure. Ms. Lachance?
Yes, through your worship, that's an excellent question. These amounts are, I would say, the expense driver that we're seeing. Council can decide where they would like to fund that from. Currently, taxation is funding each one of these. And so we would take a look and make sure that we align, of course, any funding source with the appropriate use per reserve bylaws. We do have such 2 funding sources that I would go to recommend first. One would be the unappropriated surplus, and that could be further specified as the financial stability reserve.
And you said you had a second question?
That is just what I needed to understand. Well, I guess I would say the same thing again with respect to one-time costs. If you really do need to do these things and they're staying as activities, what are you going to suggest? Or maybe I'm skipping ahead and you're going to tell us, but I'd like to know. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Lachance.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question through you, Chair. The funding sources would be the same for all 3. And the expenses don't go away. We would still have the expenses, but we would not be funding them through taxation. I would take council's direction to adjust the budget before I prepare the bylaw to provide an alternative funding source.
Thank you very much. That's everything.
Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff. Thank you for the report and your comments on this. Could you remind me what the balance is of the stability reserve?
Mr. Chance?
Yes, thank you. Through your worship, the current balance of that is $1 million.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think it's fair to say that we definitely are going to have that penciled in as options for our ability to reduce them. A final decision to come, but thank you for that. So why don't we continue? Why don't we continue?
Excellent, thank you. And I do appreciate the direction to add that in.
No worries.
Sorry, everybody's okay there? I got distracted. You guys okay? You're welcome. Oh, Siri's listening.
Can't you just ask ChatGPT to give us a budget and be done with the whole thing?
Yeah. I could hurry if you like. So I'm just going to jump into the next slide. So this is just the recap of those 3 items. I don't need to go back through it, but just to let you know we're heading into it now. The first slide gets us to the new requests. So I'm just going to sort of introduce and get started, but I hope to take you through Appendix 4. You were provided with the additional detailed Appendix 4 this afternoon. It was really in response to the ask from council for specific additional information. But the numbers, the business case, the tax impact has not changed. Ultimately, we just provided some more insight across the entire 5-year window. And then we provided some additional notation, which I hope I'll be able to provide the information on. Seeing that everybody's got it and nodding, so I'm just going to jump right in. Just moving from the top of that appendix through, this appendix was basically designed just to tease out total costs and then try to give a sense of how we distribute that across different funding sources. What's not really easy to see here is where these cost drivers are actually spreading a couple of budgets. And so I would just encourage council that in each of the department budgets, there's a detailed schedule showing where those items will show up. And so those amounts will differ slightly because they'll be distributed across multiple budgets in some cases. The other note, just to say that there are a few items here that have already been reviewed by council and approved, and I will make notations of that as we go through. So there's different implications if decisions are made on them. So the first item would be the police services, 1 officer position request for traffic enforcement in the community support team. It was included in the provisional budget approved by council on October 29th originally, and then later amended on February 24th. The total costs there are approximately 146. It looks very precise, but there could be other ancillary costs within the operating budget, perhaps safety equipment or cameras or outfitting a car or impacts that way. This is just intended to capture the direct employee costs with benefits and any direct related equipment. Moving left to right, the intention there in those middle columns is to give you a sense of where it's being funded from. And so that's my first notation on additional information I've added. The user fee column, I've added the reference to capital. So where a position is being funded directly from capital or costed to capital, I've made that note. It was an oversight in terms of thinking that the column was an other revenue, but it's not. It said user fees, so I could appreciate that may be confusing. In that column, there's 2 items that come directly from user fees that'll, as we go, it'll be clear. And then there's 2 items that come from capital. notation's been added to each of them. And then just moving over, you'll note that this position is fully funded from taxation revenue with a tax impact of 0.41% or $16 per median household. And for the out years of 2026 and 2029 will be fully funded from taxation. Just moving on to the next item, that would be the 6 FTE request for the Engineering and Public Works team. And I should mention to Mayor and Council that, of course, finance can only explain these things so well. So if there's more depth needed, I have all of my colleagues here. I'll do my best, Mr. Rennick. So consistent with the State of the Infrastructure Part 2 report received by Council, a staffing adjustment to meet capacity within the utility maintenance as well as the utility capital teams is deemed appropriate and necessary to meet the needs going forward contained in this 5-year plan. The total cost is 1.5 million thereabouts, with 1.2 million of that already included in the user fee bylaws that have been set and the budgets have been approved. So that's okay. If council wishes to make a decision about this, we can amend those bylaws. But just to make that note for council, December 9th, those amounts were already included and understood at that time. The remaining share that would land in the general fund is the 300,000 or 0.9%. And that equates to close to 36 rounded dollars per household. And then you've got user fees and taxation as the maintained split going forward on funding. And just so that, in order to help, just to be very clear, this expense total of 1.5 is actually spread across all 3 funds. I'll just keep moving on to the next. The next 2 are both in my area, in finance, IT, and asset management. The first item is a sustained procurement in order to meet the need of the higher sustained procurement activity that we're seeing. A transition to an in-house purchasing function is considered also timely. We have been seeing the costs for our external contractors increasing to a point where it makes sense to convert that to an in-house service, and we believe there are additional benefits to doing that, and that will also help us meet the increasing demand in the next couple of years. It would be ongoing. It would be, excuse me for my throat, you guys. It would be ongoing. The total cost there is 149,000. And the split there would be that a portion of it's going to go to the capital program. A significant amount of our procurement activity and risk related to procurement is within the capital program. And the remaining amount of 51,000 is showing as tax funded, or 0.14%, or $6 per household. It is important to note that there is just at the bottom of the box, the long narrative, you'll see a reference that year 2, there is expected to be cost reductions, but in year 1, we would have an increase in cost because the 2 systems would need to run in parallel. We do expect that to decrease. This estimate is based on the last 3-year average, so it's a best guess what we would experience or save going forward, but we think a reasonable estimate.
I'm just going to stop you there.
Yeah.
This is right end of the first page. Are there any questions from members of council? Councillor Patterson on the things you've covered, and then Watson.
Yes. Putting part of the package. I am just wondering about this, the additional procurement person. And I can understand where that in the future, it could in fact result in reduction of expenses to us. But could you perhaps, and through you, Mayor, to the staff, but could somebody on the staff speak to the risk that may be involved in having our own procurement person, but it's still one person, and if that person, for some reason, was away or are not here, what would be how would we mitigate that so that it didn't cause disruption to the projects and to our work?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Ms. LaChance?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. You're quite right that there are trade-offs. Absolutely, with bringing that in-house, it is a single point of failure, you could say. But I would articulate that the position, sort of the function currently does report to me. And so any kind of slack that's now or then would be picked up by the director role or any kind of one-off consulting help if we needed it. Quite often, though, what we see, because we do run a pretty lean staff, we're used to making sure that we cover, making sure that work is done before any type of vacation or leave happens. And quite often, the procurement teams stay in contact across the local municipalities. And so quite often, there's options for very cost-effective contractors to help out for a very short time. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Yes, thank you very much. I'd just like to follow along from that, Councillor Patterson's question, and ask Ms. LaChance if she could just to comment on risk. I mean, this is clearly not the Phoenix payroll system, but going through the exercise of introducing new software over a couple of years does have some risks associated with it, and I just wanted to know how you reflect on that and kind of, in effect, account for it when you put this budget together. Because I guess it does expose us in a way that doing nothing doesn't. I mean, keeping the same thing going doesn't, I should say. Not to say that's not a good idea, but I'll shut up. You talk.
What software are you referring to?
Well, in this, there is this. I thought this was part of the whole thing. Is that we were actually where there's is not just people, but there's also an investment in new software and its implementation. Am I on the wrong item?
No, it's okay. Ms. LaChance?
Yes, if I may, through you, Chair. Yeah, that definitely could have been me connecting two comments together too quickly. So I apologize for any confusion there. The costs here are really just isolated to the staff. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll move on then. I wanted to ask if you could, and maybe it may be actually for the mayor to answer, or it might be for Ms. LaChance, but I have to confess that I don't understand the nature of the term provisional budget with respect to the police services and how that relates to their governance model under which the police board itself produces and approves the budget. So could you just clarify that for me and for any members of the listening public who also don't understand that term with respect to this budget, the police services budget?
Ms. LaChance? I probably should give it to the official. If you want, I can answer. Up to you.
Yes, through you, Chair, I did think you might try to answer that for sure, or answer it. According to the Police Act, we must receive, so that we being the district and council, must receive a provisional budget approved by the police board by certain dates. That date is in the fall, and then again, a final amendment must be received by March 1st in order for that to be included in the taxation tax rate bylaw that we'll put out each year. And so it's always worth explaining that. It isn't always apparent. It's not something that you'll run across in our regular references to legislation, and it is specific to the police function at the district.
So just to clarify, the word provisional is with respect to there's mandates with respect to timing that we need to be paying attention to, but the budget itself is still open for discussion once it's submitted?
Yes, so maybe I'll jump in there. So there's a requirement for council to approve the budget. There is a process by which the council can submit the budget back to the police board if they want to see changes to it. And if the police board can't and the council can't come to an agreement on what provisional budget is, that's why it's been at this body for approval. So the word provisional is a little bit iffy because it's been approved by council and maybe difficult in that process to turn it back. But where there is a conflict between the police board and a council, there is an appeal process that goes to the province. And the province, although not fast, will come back and make a determination on what the appropriate budget would be.
So I guess to maybe recap, and you can say if I've got this right, while you could in fact make some changes here, it's not an easy process, and yeah, would that be fair to say? I guess we've seen some of this in Victoria and Esquimalt, haven't we? Yes,
Yeah,
right.
usually at the point of the provisional budget being coming for approval. That being said, I will, technically, nothing is approved until it's approved at this table for final piece. So best practice would be to raise that at the time and send it back. This would, yeah, yes. I certainly watched this process go underway in other jurisdictions many times, but it's always been at the provisional stage, not here. So I'm not sure what the process would be if it was a change to be made at the 11th hour. But it is ultimately the purview of the council to approve or not approve budgets. And may I just ask one quick question on this, and that is the I put off my question until everybody else asked their question, and now I can't remember what my question was. Oh yeah, just for my own curiosity, the procurement manager, position, is that procurement across the whole district? Is it to all departments, including all the engineering work and all the stuff going on, or is it just curious about how broad that role actually is?
Yes.
To you.
And to answer that question, thank you for that. I do think that it's a good opportunity to talk a bit about how we're fairly decentralized in terms of our procurement function. So each of the departments will carry some of that vendor management, some of the planning, timeline, approach, strategy in procurement, and they're looking for procurement specialists to help advise them, provide templates, discuss risk, and maybe perhaps have advice about when to go to legal advice. And so at the district, there are opportunities to standardize, formalize agreements to address risk, maybe modernize some of that terminology. There's opportunities to do some of the combined buying to reduce costs. There's opportunities as well as to have a partner in business. Typically, when we're using external contractors, we have a sort of a, by menu, will you help me with this or will you help me with that? But what we don't get to do is talk overall about strategy and what the goals are of each of those departments to execute on some of the significant capital programs or operating programs, and get a sense of how many they have to deliver that year, and make sure that those resources are available when they need it. And so that's some of the benefits that we have of having somebody internal, is that they get to really invest in our business, but it will remain a fairly decentralized process.
Great.
I can feel my colleagues' eyes on me. But we've discussed it many times that they just really could use that help where somebody was reaching out to them instead of them always having to move that forward. That in turn frees them up to do the work that they should be doing instead. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Lots of nodding heads around the table on that one. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just one thing that comes to mind as you were saying this, I tend to forget it sometimes, but I know that we don't have a surplus of space for employees either. And so with some of the bodies that are proposed in these plans, does that mean we have to find additional space, or will they be wedged somewhere into the existing facilities?
Mr. Graham, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I see him looking at me, so I'll jump in through you, Chair. I think I'll go with the latter. Yes, we're going to wedge them in. All joking aside, we're absolutely talking about that as a management team in terms of what kind of strategies and what kind of discussions from a facility planning point of view. And of course, my colleague, Mr. Graham, is very helpful in initiating that conversation. In this case, particularly for the purchasing manager, we would be able to use some of our flex work policy arrangements and hopefully not to put too much pressure on the existing well-used space.
Thank you. I think we've asked the question. Oh, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I just wanted to have clarity on the term in the far right column, taxation ongoing. And I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly that, in a sense, say if we were looking at the third row, finance and IT, where there's a 0.14% percentage of tax rate, that would be this year and therefore ongoing, not that it would be an additional 0.14% for many years ongoing. I just wanted to clarify my understanding of that term. Thank you.
Thank you. That is correct, but Ms. Lachance?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. It is always something worth clarifying. Tables can be presented for taxation revenue in two different ways. This is, in fact, the incremental impact, and it would continue at that level.
Those are all the hands. Sorry, Councillor Smart, oh, your hand is down. Okay, Ms. Lachance, please continue on the next page.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Just a quick question.
Sure.
I'm looking. I want to make sure that I'm looking at the right appendix because I didn't see that column that Councillor Smart was just speaking about. I'm looking at the appendix 4 on the new agenda. And is there a column after the dollar increase to medium residential property?
Ms. Lachance?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair, and to Councillor Braithwaite. Just this afternoon, in response to Council's queries from last week, we added some additional information and sent that out via email.
Oh, by email. Okay, thank you. I will pull that up. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Please continue.
So just starting, I thought I sounded funny. Funnier than I already sound. Apologies. So just starting at the page, top of page 2, we have an additional, another item within finance, IT, and asset management. This position is directly correlated to the increased activity in capital grants, as well as the anticipated borrowing program that we would need to manage on a go-forward basis. The position is a 1 FTE permanent employee for a senior financial analyst role. It's recommended to be a direct support to those departments moving through major capital plans. And so you can think, actually I have a slide later for you on that, but you can think in your mind engineering, public works, parks and rec, and then of course within facilities directly. The exercise or the business of managing multiple capital, growth in a capital program and many projects over 500,000 comes with it a certain amount of financial management risk, financial administration risk, and we feel that this would help those departments be able to run faster, smoother, and then also for us to mitigate risk. So just walking that through, we've got the estimated costs, where I think we're starting to get familiar with the columns. Again, the notation is there on the 93,000, that will be directly related to capital overhead. And then the remaining of 23,000 would be funded from taxes at 0.06% impact to tax, or $3 per household. And then that will continue on that mix on an ongoing basis.
Thank you.
Just moving on to corporate administration, this is a additional 1 FTE and human resource advisor, very much focused on the management of regular and complex long-term disability and WorkSafe BC claims experienced by the district. This position would report in to the manager of health, safety, and wellness. And then we do foresee that the position would also afford some support for human resources, recruiting processes, which are foundational to district business. And you would have heard about this in at least reference for the department presentations. You would have heard about HR challenges, HR solutions, and the accomplishments plan for 2025. This would be integral to achieving those. The costs, I've added some notation here, particularly to call out a verbal reference that I had made last meeting. So we have a cost of $116,000 as a total cost within the department budget. And then in a different line item in the budget, it was in fact, it was in general expenses. There was a disability management occupational amount established, knowing that this was costs and activity that we have at the district, but hadn't been recently used. As we used that process to review budget, looked at the 3-year average, had identified it. At the same time, I'd known that there was a business case coming forward for the position, and it makes sense to reevaluate how that shows up in our budget line items. So it is an offset. So we've reduced that budget line item to 0. And then within this financial plan that's drafted, included the operating expenses for the FTE and related costs. The taxation, net taxation after that reduction is $16,000 or 0.05% with a $2 per household impact. And that would continue ongoing full-time. Next, 2 items are from building planning and bylaw. The first item is to address the, in 2 ways. It's to address bylaw activity, but it's also to restore an appropriate service level in that function. Supporting through addressing gaps, parking compliance, and there is some still integration over with financial services to support that, but largely it needs, sorry, I lost my track there. I need thicker glasses. Sorry, I'll just jump into the cost there. So 43,000 for a 0.5 FTE position and a 0.12% impact with a $5 per household. And that would be directly funded through taxation. The next item, development application volume within the planning team is increasing, and it's also increasing in complexity. Work plan estimates for 2025 show a shortfall of 1 FTE in the team compared to staff funded staff levels. Further increase in development is expected. There has been activity forecast analysis performed, and so that's been used to provide a phase-in, if you will, of this position. It's currently split between one-time grant funding and the fee-for-service increases that have been modeled. So you'll see that 50-50 in 2025. You'll see that amount reliance on one-time revenue decrease and an increase in user fees in year 2, and then the same would happen up to 100% in year 3.
Thank you. And we might as well just, there's one more on the next page. Let's just do that and then we'll take questions.
Go all the way through. Okay, thank you. So I'll do my best to do justice for this, but definitely there's a significant amount of facilities and a facility function activity, both with my own team and also within the Parks and Rec function, or department, sorry for that. The proposal here is to convert an existing position that is in the facilities team to a manager of facilities. The first onset of that cost would be an offset. So the timing of that new hire is planned so that the vacancy, current existing vacancy, savings would offset the new hire. So there's no incremental cost, but as that position has been converted to a manager, will experience incremental costs in the second year and then ongoing thereafter. particularly for recreation, is a mix of fees and taxation. And so that would be the blend you can expect in the future years.
At that point, any questions for staff on any of the items that we've just covered? Looking online and in the room, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. It's very nice having this so that you can kind of see what's happening in each section. Sometimes hard to, parse out these things, but, so where it speaks to the support for parking and animal contractors, does that extend the hours of operation, or does it just expand the kind of the territory covered during normal business hours?
Ms. LaChance?
If that's okay, I'll defer to my colleague, Mr. Bowl, to talk about service levels and activity with that role.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. There have been some changes made within the organization for these two services, parking control and, animal control and parking enforcement. They used to be spread out through different departments and were parked under the different directors. What we have done, we've assigned this work all to the bylaw compliance official to centralize that and have better coordination and also support from the different staff people that are involved in this process, in these processes. So this capacity is more geared to deal with an incremental increase in the other bylaw compliance work, because that has been steadily increasing over the years. It was something that we noticed last year already, that we're getting to the point where the bylaw complaints, apart from animal control and parking, are taking up all the time for the bylaw compliance official. So now with the other tasks added to it, we need some extra hours in that area to make sure we can continue to do everything we want to do. And there is a bit of where it talks about restoration, there's a few gaps in the parking compliance process that have been, they've come about a couple of years ago and not been patched, if you will. And I think COVID had a lot to do with that and other changes in the organization. But that's another thing that needs attention, and that's where this additional capacity comes into play. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for that information, Mr. Bull. I guess to following along on that, then, if the number of complaints, I guess it would, or infractions are increasing, does that mean right now that we're not able to manage them all effectively so that we get through them? It doesn't mean that we have to prioritize them and identify which come as a priority and which get pushed to the side of the desk, so to speak.
Sure. I'm just going to ask a favor, Councillor Patterson. You're acting mayor right now. I just need to deal with one quick thing, the home thing. So can I just get you to take over the meeting for a couple of minutes? I'll be right back. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. It's more a matter of taking more time to get through all these files. So from time to time, there's a backlog, and people are waiting longer than we'd like them to wait for follow-up or responses. And it ebbs and flows. This is not a static volume. It varies from time to time. But yeah, I think we're noticing and flagging last year for the first time that it's regularly piling up, so to say. A queue is created that needs to be caught up on, and that's a situation we'd like to stay on top of before we create frustrations in the community members being not responsive anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. I suppose I will just continue with my questions and then we'll go to the rest of council. Under the Parks, Rec and Culture, the recommended addition of the facilities manager role, and I'm not certain who is best to respond to this, but hopefully one member of staff will be able to pick it up. I guess I have some difficulty seeing the logic in splitting facilities management into departments, instead of keeping it under one umbrella, because I think it can tend to lead to siloed kind of thinking as to the district's assets, and the Parks and Rec assets are still district assets along with all of the other buildings. So I'm just wondering if somebody could speak to the rationale for dividing these between the departments.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Hopefully I can share some of my comments and response on that. Maybe I would call in some of my colleagues, maybe even Ms. Williams, because she would have more of the history on how the evolution of these two separate functions came to be. But definitely as it pertains to this budget, the current investments that we're making, the capital plan ahead of us, and the number of facilities that we have, both of specialty nature, and then I'll call them for general municipal purpose. And currently, that responsibility is split. And this is just, I just want to throw in, just like, because I'm new, I am shocked at how many recreation facilities we have. It's amazing, the footprint. It really a cornerstone to that function and community service. And so I'm not surprised to see the facility staff that I see in Parks and Rec, apologies. This position and the converting it to manager, and I do have a bit of background, and I can always pass over to Miss Atkins as well, but I had worked with the previous director on developing the business case, and ultimately the director was doing a lot of the planning for some of the major inner work, I'll call it. So within a recreation center, there's highly specialized equipment, chemicals, there's interruption to operations on any kind of major capital. And so all of that took a fair amount of planning work. And the current facility team was primarily designed to deliver day-to-day and maintenance. And so there was a existing gap on the planning side, and with some of those delivery on major projects. We do talk about it in terms of what's the most reasonable allocation of responsibility on facilities. There's definitely a case to be made for where there are specialty equipment that are highly integrated with the operations, and I'll call it lights on. There's a lot to say for dedicated support within a department.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Any other questions from members of council? Not seeing any, so please continue, Ms. Lachatz, and the other areas on that slide.
I was just going to give some of my colleagues a moment to jump in on that if I had done any injustice to that.
I'll go to the Acting Director of Parks and Rec, and then I'll come over to you, Councillor Watson.
Through you, Mayor. Just a quick addition to Rihanna's excellent description. I think there's two aspects to the role. That long-term capital asset planning work, I'd largely see that manager role being more accountable to the facilities director. And then there's the day-to-day management of staff operations, specialty equipment, being responsive to the needs of patrons within the facility that person would look after on a daily basis.
Thank you for that. Councillor Watson.
Yes, so thank you, Mayor. I just want to continue the conversation about this because I had the same question as Councillor Patterson, and actually wrote down the word silos because I was concerned about that. What I think I understood from Ms. Atkins is that, if I heard you correctly, that you see this position as maybe having dual reporting responsibilities? Is that what you just were suggesting?
I think they would be accountable primarily to the Director of Parks, Recreation and Culture, but responsible to fulfill an asset management planning capacity under direction of the facilities director.
Thank you, that helps. And then I just wonder, like I understand thank you very much for the explanation, Ms. LaChance and Ms. Atkins. I just wondered if there were other models looked at, like this is a proposal, and you talked about actually working on that, like putting it together and what it looked like budget-wise. Were other things considered?
Ms. LaChance, you can hand it off to somebody else if you wish.
Thank you. I would just start off by saying that in the analysis and our discussion on the proposal, there's three other options provided, risk analysis included. I can't recall them off the top of my head, apologies. And I know the director would, but I'm going to give a pass on Ms. Atkinson. I'm sorry, I mispronounced her name. But definitely other options were explored. And but happy to take other direction if there's more inquiry needed.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I'm just referring to the development, basically the 1.0 FTE to support the Building, Planning and Bylaw Department, just in terms of application volume. In reference to the Finance, IT, and Asset Management position, talking about savings on that position, I think Ms. LaChance mentioned that the cost reductions were based on a 3-year average for that calculation. Under the building and planning position, it basically says 50%, 75%, 100%. What's our level of comfort with those numbers, and what's, it seems like a pretty rough number to me, so I'm just wondering how confident we can be in that projection.
Ms. LaChance, again, you may fob that off on somebody else if you wish.
Yes, I'll always be happy to do that. But I'll just start us off with just sort of general expectations that as the finance manager on financial planning that I would be looking for. And so in this case, you're right, they're sort of round numbers. They're our best guess for those future years. It is very tricky to forecast revenue activity in the building and planning team. It is something that we want to be conservative around. And so in doing that, I know that the revenue estimates that allow this to be possible are on the conservative side. So the assumptions being used are conservative so more probable. If we were to encounter any challenges or be off of that forecast, that would be coming back through our quarterly reporting to council. So you'd see an early indication that we would have to revise those estimates, possibly do a financial plan amendment, and then we would, in the future years, have to refresh those assumptions. I'm going to allow Mr. Bull to jump in if he'd like.
Mr. Bull.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. And some of the practical underlying trends here are that we did make substantial change to our housing program. So the infill housing program is resulting in infill housing projects. We see a change in our building permit types. So definitely several infill housing projects coming in. And with that is come higher construction values and therefore higher building permit revenues. So that's an anticipated trend that is starting and is visible. We don't know exactly how it will go, but we try to estimate that, but conservatively. The other thing that is that we are benefiting from is that we did update our fees in 2023 for development applications, and it also has resulted in more revenue there because we have seen an increased interest in heritage revitalization agreements and in rezoning applications, and each of those processes are more substantial and also bring in more revenue, but also more work, and that's where this position comes into play. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship, and I appreciate that. Just a follow-up question to staff. Ms. LaChance mentioned that changes in the assumption with respect to this position and potentially the expenditure flow, if you will, with respect to this would potentially trigger a change to a revision to the 5-year financial plan bylaw. So if there were expenses associated with this position that right now it shows this is an appendix forming part of the budget package, which indicates doesn't have a taxation impact from that position. If it was necessary for the position to incur taxation impact at any level, would that then trigger a 5-year financial plan amendment? Would council see that again?
Ms. LaChance?
Yes, thank you for the question. As we do each year, we bring back the 5-year financial plan and are at times updating our assumptions. In terms of a business case to put in an FTE and fund that by a mix of one-time funding and then move that to fees, that would be the priority. So there would be maybe other measures we would take or other analysis or maybe changes in fees and charges that we would have to make before we would recommend or adjust that assumption. So I think maybe put that more simply, the intent on this position is that it will be fully funded from fees and charges. And that's what the 5-year analysis is telling us. But as I mentioned, whether it's 75, whether it's 78, the actuals can differ.
Just for clarification, the grant that's funding it is a Growing Communities Fund, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. So very, very quick follow-up then, again, on something that was mentioned. I think this was probably for Mr. Bowl. If I could just have my memory refreshed. I do recall that we just did some work on the fees and charges bylaw and updated those to more modern numbers. If you could refresh my memory as to whether or not that has a built-in review period on it. Does it have something implicit in the language that it will be reviewed on a certain schedule? I don't actually recall.
Mr. Bull?
Through you, Mayor, we don't have a set revisiting that, but there will be opportunities or really good reasons to refresh them in the near future, which is probably, not sure if that's got to be this year, but probably next year, because we're also looking at other changes to land use programs this year, substantial changes. And the other thing that is underway is an optimization of development review processes project. And if that results or other council direction might result in changes how processes are done, that would also be a reason to revisit what fees are collected for what type of applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands at this point, so Ms. LaChance? Please continue.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to transition us into the next and last series of slides. The next section has been organized to address number 2 and 3 from the council requests. So there's a desire to do a deeper dive on the debt program, as well as the confidence level in terms of the timing, scope, or amounts that we're seeing there. I'll take us through a few of the slides, and I'm happy to, if we've missed anything or there's more information needed, answer those questions. The first slide really is intended to take us back to the driver of any kind of debt program or use of reserves. This is a slide council is familiar with from the last meeting. Ultimately, the borrowing plan that's been put together is a direct correlation to the planned expenditures. And just as a refresher, the 5-year plan that we're focused in on this slide is the light blue bars. You'll see previous year plans on this slide, just as reference to show you what this group is trying to endeavor and will be completing in the next, near completing in the next 5 years. So the other part to mention around the borrowing program is that the current integration of borrowing into this 5-year plan is based on Government of Officers Association best practices, both the international organization as well as the BC organization. It provides specific guidance on when borrowing is okay, if I could put it that simply. There are reasons why a municipality district will use debt to help deliver services in the most efficient, both cost effectiveness, but also in terms of timing that with the community demand. And there are very safe ways to use debt programs, provided the right monitoring programs are in place. Just to reiterate, the capital plan is actually the driver, and reserves, along with debt and grants, are the cash flows that help us meet that expenditure plan. The grants within our 5-year plan are only contemplated if they're reasonably assured. We do not include grant placeholders for programs that might come. We're often pursuing them. There's lots of activity, frequent reporting to council where appropriate, separately from the budget report and budget draft. But as part of the draft, we need to be assured, if we put expenditure plans in place, that we will be able to fund them, grants or no grants. So I will just say, and we'll talk more about confidence level a bit later, but I'll just say that, grants are a major factor that can impact the borrowing plan. It is notable that in your package in Appendix 6, we have a filtered list. It's usually a very good trick, a very good finance trick, to take a look at some of the major projects that we want to pay attention to and make sure that those departments get all the support they need. When I did that filtering, I had over 90% of the capital plan are projects that are over $500,000 as a total project cost. That tells us that we're in a period of major investment, as I mentioned earlier, but also that those programs can come, those projects of that size can come with some risk. So when we take a look at how to finance those and fund those, it's really important to have a strategy involved, so that you're using the best cost-effective dollar for the right projects. I'm just going to flip over to the next slide. This slide also is a regurgitation, but really important just to thread the discussion around debt today. If you're looking to impact timing on capital or the related borrowing, you'd be going back to maybe this as a tool to know which projects you can influence timing on, and maybe have that discussion here tonight. You will see to the left of this graphic, I know it's very hard here, but I hope you have it in your packages. You're going to see a significant amount for the engineering and public works teams. And then moving all the way to the right, you'll see some of the smaller programs. So when we talk about debt, we're really focusing on those larger programs. The next slide, excuse me. The next slide is the reserve levels. So this is just a graphic. Oh, yep.
Curiosity, why is the engineering and public works separated from water utility and sewer utility? They still fall under the works of engineering and public works. Is that just to give us some clarity of where that money is being spent?
Yes.
Okay.
Simple answer. I want to, sometimes we're subject to finance doing their job too well. We like to make sure that the reporting structure that we have within our structured database is consistent throughout, so you can follow the trail. This is just an example of where we absolutely must account for the water fund and the sewer fund separately from the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
And I know
if you
it's
look at it,
becoming a very dated way to look at things, but
It's still, it's remarkable, because when you actually add them up, it's $45 million. It's an incredibly large number
Yes.
for what's
Yeah.
going on, so.
yeah, and I do
Yes.
like to add them together because particularly in terms of supporting that team to achieve those outcomes, you have to think of it collectively. Staff are in that team serving all of those budget outcomes.
Great, thank you very much.
So just transitioning us into reserves. So I didn't get time to add in the 2024 here, but what you would see if I had the 2024 column would see a reserve balance that we are carrying forward of approximately $60 million. The different colors within this graph are the different types of reserves. The lion's share is capital reserves. And that $60 million, and you can see in this graphic, quickly gets drawn down to $30 million with the work that we have planned ahead. There is always in a capital plan, subject to carry forward, so where works in progress, amounts will be carried forward. So it might not be that exact number when you see the financial statements next year. But generally, this is a good indication of the net draw that we have on reserves and how we need to make sure that we may use other funding sources or maybe pursue grants more aggressively. I know we've already got that approach in play. So then the only other source would be moving to debt to stabilize. It does look like we're saving money at the end of the 5-year term. I just want to articulate for council that we are in a period of investment, so we are drawing down on all of those savings that have occurred. And the upswing in the last tail end of this graph really is attributable to council setting in place those transfers to sustainable levels. You really do want to see this growing, given the asset footprint that we have and the fact that we will have other assets coming to their end of their useful life. They're just outside this window. So this doesn't mean that that this is something that we don't want to see, or that we're raising too much money. It's just that the longer term plans that we'll be coming back with will substantiate and help us make sense of that, those balances. So just jumping in then to provide that additional level of detail for the debt. And actually this was a slide I would have gotten to last week. So I'm glad that it ties in. I'm just going to talk us through the graph because it's the first time council's seeing it. And then I'm going to, I could always pause there if there's more questions. So what we see here is on the left side, you'll see the blue bar chart or columns, and that is the 2024 to 2028 planned borrowing. So we had already planned borrowing last year, but it wasn't supposed to start until 2025. We are now 2025, and so that plan's still in play. You just seeing the orange columns, that's the new draft plan 2025 to 2029. And you will see an increase in debt through that 5 years. And up in the right corner, we've highlighted what those drivers are. So total borrowing under the previous 5-year plan was supposed to be, or planned to be, about 54 million. The current plan is about 104 million, so it is a significant increase. It is notable that when we want to make concrete plans about borrowing, that we want to be comfortable that those are appropriate levels. So I am prepared to help council with some debt management policy later this year, and today hope that you'll have a good sense of how to manage that in the 5-year plan. The increases that you'll be familiar with on the, like I said, on the upper quadrant in the green is the increase in the Carnarvon Park. That was largely scope. There was some pricing, of course, as time passes. Inflation will affect our initial, maybe concept costs, but ultimately there are decisions through a project that council will be involved in and have the opportunity to direct, and the cost increases here are related to those recent decisions. That project is currently in the design, detailed design phase, and will be coming back to council. So although we included in the plan and we've matched up total project cost to that higher amount, it's not an absolute. We only ever borrow for actual costs. And before we actually do that, there's other gates to hit. There's project approvals, loan authorization bylaws, and at each of those stages, we become more concrete in terms of what the borrowing will actually be. Up until then, it's all modeling and estimates. The next item was the, oh, go ahead.
I'm just going to make sure I reflect that, because I want to make sure we're all clear at this table. As I understand what you said, the financial plan forecasts these pieces, but there is no authorization for any debt through this financial plan. The financial plan lays out our expected spending, but doesn't lay out the actual, so the debt decisions are to come, essentially, is what you're saying. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, so just to respond directly to that, the financial plan would lay out the expenditure authority and then the intended funding source. The next process would be to bring a loan authorization back to council. If we are requiring public approval or public process on that, we would then come to council, talk about the public process, design that public process, and then bring that borrowing ask to public engagement, returning after that with the loan authorization.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please continue, yeah.
So with that, I'm just going to jump into, oh, I actually wanted to mention before I do this, I wanted to mention that I included a bit more detail. I recall from last meeting, Councillor Apperton had asked for the principal and interest and the detail of the by project and the amounts of borrowing. So we added Appendix 11 to that effect. And so you'll see the details about how that principal and interest has been calculated. And then you'll also see, I tried to, without much time, I tried to create a graph on the second page that's 3D. So you'll see the borrowing program by project on that second page.
Thank you.
The other item I wanted to walk council through was the adjustment that happened within the Appendix 9. And I just wanted to help, if it's okay, I just wanted to, I know that it's explained in the email, but I just wanted to help articulate what that change was. So there was a change to the third and fourth row in the final table on page 8 in Appendix 9. All the change was a result of, there was a formula error that was just taking the change in the budget incorrectly. And so there was no change to the principal interest or the borrowing amounts. The table then recalculated the tax impact. There is no change to tax revenue. So the actual change in tax revenue that we've reviewed tonight, that you've seen, that's part of the financial plan. So there's no effect on the balanced financial plan. It was only to affect that revision for the change in that table. The notable amounts there, and for reference, because before that change, it was difficult to understand how that amount was included in the total tax revenue.
Right.
Okay. And so now those numbers will make more sense for council.
Great, thank you.
I don't have a slide on that because it was included within the email and also amended in your package.
Thank you.
But I do have the same numbers in front of me and happy to walk that through.
No, that's great, thank you.
Okay. So just my last slide here, and this is just where, borrowing, once you have borrowed, so although there's a few steps we have to go before we actually commit to borrowing, once you have borrowed, you're all in. And so it's really important to make sure that we really understand the long-term implications to multiple debt issues, why we're using debt, have those guidelines and policy in place, and then monitor that. So at a governance level, it's very important that there's a few key metrics that we would report to you on a regular basis. This is one such metric or indicator that would regularly be coming once we've advanced the debt program. And so just to walk council through, what you're seeing here is a red line, which depicts the 25% of revenue maximum. That is set within the MFA framework and legislation. The district must borrow through MFA. That's the Municipal Finance Authority. And that is their limit they set. But it's also a generally accepted creditworthiness benchmark for banking sector in general. And so it's, rest assured, a good indicator all around and not just a limit on what we're able to get. You're really going to use this as a credit monitoring tool.
Thank you.
You will see the 5-year is just coming in even at the later stages. So that would be once we've advanced the capital plan expense amounts for Carnarvon. largely through public safety building plans that we've got included. You would also have some of the major underground and road programs also supported through the debt program. The borrowing principal and interest total as a percentage of revenue would be 9.53%, just as a note on this graph and what to take away from it.
Great, thank you. Can you remind us what the threshold is where you have to go to the public for referendum to approve borrowing? Is that on a project over a certain size, or is it when the total debt amount is exceeding a certain amount?
Yes, it's actually only available when you have no debt outstanding, up to 5% of your controllable revenues. And so that's...
So only after, as soon as it hits 5%, you have to go and make requests to the public?
That's correct,
Okay,
yep.
thank you.
You would be going for electoral approval.
Thanks.
So that is the end of my slide deck, as well as the additional information that we were asked to come back with, and available to answer any questions, go over any of the graphics, or circle back to earlier material.
Great, thank you. Green there, and I have Councillor Smart with a hand up, and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. I had a question. I really appreciate the updating. I'm referring to Appendix 9, page 8, where the 5-year projected debt servicing cost and debt servicing percentage has been updated in that table. I'm wondering, when I see those updates, are those then reflected if I go back to Appendix 8, page 8, where we have the 5-year tax increase projections? I'm just wondering, are the debt percentages included in these projected property tax increases per year?
Mr. Chance?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so those rates that you're seeing there, those percentage changes do not change. The forecasted revenue as well as the percentage changes were fine. No changes happened. It was just a modeling calculation that had an error and was corrected. So it is true that you can assume those debt percentages are included in those tax increases.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just, there's the other hands up here. One other question I have was just around with the implementation of the development cost charges and amenity cost charges. New development pays separately for some of the things, the new assets in the building. Is there any use of those in any of the predictive models that we have here, or because there's no sort of surety to that? I'm curious where that gets measured, because those would ultimately offset some of the new infrastructure costs looking forward. Ms. LaChance?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the question. I was joking with my colleagues a bit that 50%, I'm only able to get through 50% of what I want to say. That was on the other 50% I haven't talked about yet. Thank you. So yes, absolutely. Both the development cost charges and amenity cost charges are fees that we will start collecting on any new applications coming in. It will take us time to collect those amounts. And there is a specified project list or program in behind that, as council will probably recall. As we would go and do those projects, we have to identify specifically what portion of that project is related to growth, and then those funds can be used for that.
We have a 1-year layover period, I believe, anyway, so there's a... nothing in 2025 would come in on those.
For any
pieces.
in-stream,
Right.
correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Appleton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to Ms. LaChance. A couple things I'd like to talk about, and that is, one, the first thing is the reliance or use of grants and how it, in fact, can weaken a budget going forward when communities rely so heavily on grants because they don't have the capacity to fund things. Is there a way through the budgeting processes to identify the risk inherent in relying heavily on grants as opposed to being able to provide sustainable funding for projects.
Ms. LaChance, and I will note in the report, I think it said we have about 4% of our capital projects currently predicted to be using grants as part of the revenue stream, so it's not massive, but so currently not, but yeah, please answer the question.
Thank you. I know there are people amongst my colleagues that'll probably do a better job of this, so I will invite them to jump in. But I do want to just speak about the financial plan and approach to grants. And so I think there is a risk if we were to take the approach from a financial planning point of view to include placeholders in and amongst the years and the projects. We would, in some way, perhaps be flying blind because we wouldn't know the true state of funding health for the organization. And so absolutely, if that's the approach we were taking, I am confident and comforted that we do not take that approach, that we only put grants in if they're reasonably assured. And that gives us a clear sense of the real commitment and obligation that we have. And then when we do actively pursue grants, because we are, they come in and they will counterbalance. So we, at any time in the year, we can amend the financial plan, welcome that grant in, show it as a funding source, and then relieve either the reserves or debt that would have otherwise been drawn on. So in terms of risk, our approach to financial planning reduces that, so we can make decisions with the right funding health in mind.
Councillor Appleton? Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
continue,
can
Councillor Patterson.
I, if I could just continue, is there, based on kind of sizes of budget, sizes of communities, is there an accepted or preferred amount of debt servicing, say as a percentage of consolidated expenditure or revenue that it, now, we don't have a policy on that, so I'm just trying to gauge perhaps what you might be coming forward in the future of what's a recommended amount that might be right for a community of this size.
Apparently you don't like surprises, Councillor Patterson. Ms. LaChance?
Yes, and at risk of stealing all my thunder from the debt policy we're going to review together, I would say that it's an excellent question, and it is one that there isn't really a best practice or a guide to how much debt based on the size of the district or size of the organization. What we're really looking at is the asset base, availability of reserves, the health of those assets. So what kind of state, particularly for the district, we're in a place of high investment to catch up for previous end of life or deferred replacement. And so that's a very good time to try to use borrowing to spread costs across time. And so there are a number of different let's call it indicators or targets that we will want to talk about when we develop that policy that'll help us understand if this is the right amount of debt. And maybe just to leave that off, that question off there, or my answer off, is that you're really looking at an appropriate debt to equity approach when you are in an investment cycle for assets. So it actually reduces your overall cost of capital when you borrow. And don't only use reserves because they can earn interest. It's extremely expensive to have the taxpayer of today putting all of that money away, and I hope to show you some of that a little bit later in the spring.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for that. It's good to know that it's coming. I suppose I have always felt that the weakness, if there was one, in our sustainable infrastructure replacement plan was that it correctly identifies annualized costs, but in practical application that doesn't work because when we have a backlog of I can see Director of Engineering is nodding, but when we have a backlog, the annualized, it's a guidance tool, but it doesn't really in my opinion anyways, provide full transparency of the peaks and valleys of when the capital will be required. So that is something that I still see as a shortcoming in the data that we have to date. So and I'm looking for a longer term plan too. So perhaps could you just speak to what your approach will be to readapting our plans to give us a better transparency about that?
Is there a chance?
So I think I would say that absolutely we'll be able to address that when we come back with the policy. I'm careful not to steal the thunder from that time, and I haven't prepared it yet. So I think you pick up on a really good concept. You noted that the Director of Engineering was nodding. He and I have had several conversations about this when we've got our sites. I don't want to take away from the hard work that Council has done to, in a meaningful way, adjust funding shortfalls. But the target that was set was really just to get as if we had already been replacing. So as you rightfully note, the sustainable funding target is really about if you don't have backlog. And so that's where absolutely when we're looking at, and we are in the utility business and we're in the major infrastructure business. In fact, our operating budget and our capital budget for 2025 is 50-50. It's not typical of many organizations. And so, when you're looking at that, you really are looking to deal with long life of assets, and you're looking to find some way to pay for that over time, but still mitigating the accumulated interest, exponentially costing more than can be tolerated. So I hope that helps for tonight. But some of my colleagues are laughing right now because I told them that they shouldn't let me talk about debt too long.
I'm just going to cut you off and think, okay, we do need to get to the budget, which is the primary piece here, but Councillor Patterson.
Yes, and my next question really is trying to gauge the certainty of the information that has been presented, both in terms of the validity of the numbers that are presented and the information that supports those numbers, particularly with the public safety building. I mean, there's numbers in there, but without the feasibility, to me, it would seem that there's less certainty. And also, I know that in the 2024 budget, the Carnarvon Park building, which at that time was only projected to be 8 million, and now we're at a substantially higher number, but the annualized life cycle cost added another $500,000 or 1.45% tax increase, and that's what was presented in the 2024 budget. We're not seeing the life cycle costs identified in this, and so have they been included? If not, do they get added in when you do the next revision of the plan?
Is there a chance?
Yes, thank you for the question. It is, in changing the package, it is, the life cycle costing section is missing. Although the amounts were included last year, they were not included within the financial plan. So they were analytical forecasts of what that capital decision could result in. As we've talked about a few times, we want to get to a place where, as a result of strategy and policy, we're incorporating life cycle costing and operating costs of new capital into the financial plan. And that is a transition period we have to go through. We wouldn't start necessarily doing it on one project. We would want to be fully costing on all of the capital works that we're doing. The two projects that you mentioned are currently, so one's a little ahead of the other. So I'm speaking particularly about the Carnarvon Park renewal, and then also the public safety building. They're just at slightly different stages, but both early in the planning phase. Typically, when we're coming out of detailed design and we have a better idea of scope, that's when we want to firm up our life cycle cost estimates And then even in that case, in my experience, in my time with the CRD on a major wastewater project, the life cycle costs were still being revised through delivery of that major project, because as they go, things change. And so they really are very much related to the actual components and infrastructure design that gets delivered at the end of the day. And so we would be looking to make sure that each step of the decision-making process, those life cycle costs are included in the analysis on the project. So not necessarily at a high level, just part of the financial plan, but not included. We will be coming back again on asset management strategy and policy. And so we are looking to actually put some of that into work. So life cycle is a way we do it versus just the forecasting exercise.
Thank you. Please continue, Councillor
Yeah,
Patterson. I do want to get to-
so just then to kind of wrap up where I am in my mind then, so I see this as a greater certainty budget for the 2025 budget, but the certainty decreasing as the years move forward at this point in time. Is that a fair statement?
Mr. Chance?
And I think fair, yes. I think fair's to consider that the first year out in our plan, the capital expenditures as planned are likely to proceed. We do allow for some sort of budget transfer or allowance to carry forward because some projects just won't move forward. In terms of confidence level or how sure are we on the capital costs, those are being refined. So for in the case of Carnarvon, we've got Class D estimate, and we're fairly well scoped in terms of council's direction to date and moving through detailed design. The confidence level on those project costs as we near launch of the project will firm up and be closer to Class B, Class C.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I just wanted to just double check a couple of numbers here. And I'm just making references, picking up on something that Councillor Smart had mentioned. There are revised numbers in Appendix 11 with respect to 5-year projected tax impacts, percentage tax impacts in the revised table. And then if I cross-reference that with a 5-year tax increase overall, the revised numbers clearly are jibing a lot better, but they in some cases they compose quite a lot of the proposed. Like if I look at 2029, for instance, and I'm recognizing this is a little ways out, 2029 projected tax increase is 7.5, but the actual percentage projected for the borrowing impact is 4.9. That's 2.6% above and beyond the borrowing costs. And we're looking at year over year forced growth costs, in excess of 5% right now. I don't think 5 to 6% is sort of becoming the norm. So recognizing this is a couple of years out, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of freeboard between the projected debt servicing percentages that are laid out in this appendix and the 5-year taxation revenue and tax increase projections that are there. So I was wondering whether we could comment on that.
Mr. Chance?
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair. I really appreciate the question, and I'm heartened by the fact that that you're forward-thinking in respecting a 5-year plan exercise. I really appreciate that. I appreciate, and I think your statement is exactly right, that in the out year, in a particular year, the debt percentage impact, so the incremental debt and the impact on the tax rate change is mostly made up of debt in that year. It is an out year, so we are using planning assumptions well below our current expectations or assumptions for forced growth or the inflationary impacts. So as we get further out in the 5-year financial plan, it's very hard to tell what those inflationary pressures will be. So we will revert to very stable type assumptions. In this case, in the out year, and I'm summing up many budgets when I say this, but we're somewhere in around that 2% that you'll end up seeing in those out years. One other thing to note, and probably the more material part of the explanation, is that we will have the decline. So each year we've been phasing in increases in the levy to the transfer to infrastructure. And so that does end somewhere in around midterm. It's different for the water and sewer utilities than it is for the general fund, but both have a sunset, and that is somewhere in around that same period. And so when you're looking at the percentage change, you have a downward pressure or reducing pressure on tax increase, and then you have the increasing debt borrowing coming on. So it does make up a large share that particular year.
Anything else, Councillor Appleton?
Yes, Your Worship,
I'm
thanks.
going to interrupt you just for a second, and just because we have no more hands at this point, I just want to let members of the public who do wish to speak to council, either with questions or comments, I will be inviting you to speak after Council Appleton is done. So ready yourself to raise your hand if you wish to speak. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that's actually a very good segue, because that was my second question. I was just hoping whether we could be reminded of, jumping around a little bit here, but just in terms of the asset management increase that's laid out in the consolidated plan, that's the 2.2% year over year. And I was just wondering whether we could be reminded of where we're sitting in terms of the implementation of that, in terms of year what of what, as far as where we were with that.
Yes, thank you for that question. So it, as I mentioned, it does slightly differ between the different funds, but for water and sewer, it was the third year of that 6 or 8 years. I'm looking at my friend. 8 years within the utilities. And then in the general fund, actually when I tried to piece together the history, there was increases before the stated sustainable infrastructure replacement plan. But we are also in year 3 of that planned increase. So I would just say that there has been increases that council put in place before that in the general fund, and then also has achieved a year 3 of that 6-year program.
Thank you. It started 3 years prior to that, but
Oh, okay,
it was
perfect.
not it was not sort of officially into when it would take off. We just knew we needed money in there, so we started putting it in. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm not going to belabor the borrowing component too far, but I did want to just query, in the projected borrowing that we have here, we have some items that we could call defined, very limited in scope. They have an envelope that they fit within: the water main, the Carnarvon Park building, associated pieces, public safety building, etc. Also included here is 26 million over this period for road and storm sewer rehabilitation, and we have been informed through the sustainable infrastructure plan that borrowing was to be required for these things. With respect to Ms. LaChance's comment about borrowing for actual costs, Council has not seen these costs as yet, and I think it's fair to characterize both road and storm sewer rehabilitation as not completely open-ended, but certainly you could, Mr. Rennick could comment on this, but we could probably double that and still spend that because we have such an infrastructure deficit. What I'm curious about is, at one point, it sounds like we're going to have a borrowing discussion with respect to the road and storm sewer rehabilitation piece, broadly, that infrastructure piece. We have to borrow against actual costs. Is there going to be an intermediary step of council review of year-over-year expenses with respect to road and storm sewer rehabilitation to inform the amount that goes into the projected borrowing? Is what I'm asking, because not to put too fine a point on it, but this is a very open-ended number, and really we could spend probably more than this. So it's about defining a scope around this and sort of getting an overall picture of, we're moving to a very, very high level. Granted, there's some large buildings in here and that sort of thing, but we're moving to a very large percentage, from 0 to a very large percentage of infrastructure work or capital work funded by borrowing. So I'm wondering where that intermediate step is specifically with road and storm sewer, because I can see how the design works for the other two pieces, but the first two are more open-ended.
Mr. Shantz?
So I think we're going to tag team.
Excellent.
I would like to just a couple quick notes on when you will see actuals. The capital program is reported as part of the quarterly variance to council. We do a quarter two and a quarter three. And then additionally, you will see the financial statements coming shortly. We'll give Alice a little more time than shortly, but they will be coming soon, and you will see those audited financial statements. That'll help. And the loan authorization, you are correct in picking up that the loan authorization would pick up the program, not a particular project, and so could be funding a number of projects. This last comment, and then I'll pass over to my colleague, Mr. Rennick, is that the amounts that you see for those two programs are maximums. So in terms of the open-endedness of it, they are, and you were quite right to mention that it probably could be double or triple this, but we have set this at an appropriate level for the reserves that we have, as well as the ability to borrow as part of the sustainable investment replacement plan. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass over to Mr. Rennick.
Mr. Rennick, welcome.
Thank you. And through the mayor, I just want to talk a little bit about how those funding envelopes are determined, because for those two projects, they're actually determined two different ways. For the storm sewer replacement, it's essentially looking at, because storm sewer replacements are major projects that require major road disruptions, there is a limit to how many of those types of projects can be delivered in an individual year. There's a theoretical upper limit where you can't rip up every single road in the district in the same year, or people would have nowhere to drive. But there's a much lower practical upper limit of how many engineering consultants are available in the region, how many civil construction firms are available in the region, how many of these projects can the engineering department actually oversee. And so this funding envelope is kind of looking at what's a reasonable level of work, and then we get into the operational work through proper asset management practices of saying, okay, for that envelope, what are the most important projects? What's the best bang for our buck? For the road rehabilitation, that's actually one where we can bring in consultants to do studies on the condition of our asphalt, and they kind of give it a bit of a scorecard. There's a score called a pavement condition index, and once every 10 years, we bring in a consultant to drive every single road in the district with some very sophisticated machinery, measure the average pavement condition index, and make sure it's not getting any worse. And so that road rehabilitation budget is essentially set at keeping our roads in roughly the same condition. And that's actually an approach that works really well for municipalities. So you check in every 10 years and make sure that your investment is on track. And we just checked in 2023, and our investments have been on track. So that number is ground truthed.
Mr. Rennick, Councillor Appleton, anything else?
Thank you, Worship. That's very helpful. So just to follow up, before the borrowing is executed, there will be sort of a supporting staff report, a summation of essentially what Mr. Rennick has described with the associated numbers. Do I get that correct?
Mr. Shantz?
Yes, that's correct. And that's also the time that we would be articulating further the rate amortization period and any other implications that council would need to be aware of.
I did say I would go to the public at this point, so I don't see any hands from the public yet, but I just invite you, if you're online and wish to speak to us, if you can call the 1855 number and hit *9, or if you're on the Zoom call and want to speak, you can just use the React tab within Zoom and raise your hand within that tab. See, someone's just turned on their video. Would you like to speak, sir? I have Anthony Roy name. Is that were you intending to speak? You can unmute yourself and I'll welcome you to the meeting.
Thank you. Is that functioning now?
It is. If you can just state your name and municipality resident for the record, and then you're welcome to address council.
Sure. My name is Anthony Roy. I'm a resident of Oak Bay Municipality. I live down on Central. Is this an appropriate time for me to make a series of short observations about the budget, providing feedback to council?
It is.
I don't really have a series of specific questions per se.
Nope, observations are welcome as well, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a couple of comments on the budget, but to set the context, I think it's important to draw your attention to some of the key results of the 2024 annual community feedback exercise, because it's as close as we have kind of the voice of the people, as it were, I would suggest. So when we look at the result highlights, the most principal one is that a majority of respondents, 44%, would advise council to limit tax and/or user-fee increases and to maintain current service levels over increases to expand services. So basically, people really are avoidant to tax increases to the extent that it's possible to pull it off. So that's one principal theme, which I think should really guide your considerations when it comes to the budget here now. A second one is that when we looked at transportation forms in that survey, walking was reported as the most common form of transportation, which is interesting. 70% of respondents indicated they walk at least once a day, followed by travel by passenger vehicle at 46%. And those principal feedbacks is very important to consider. How do the people of this district with their particular demographic mix, right? Because we're not looking at the same demographic mix that you may find, for example, in Langford. It's okay. We're an older municipality, and that's reflected in some of these responses. The third point from the survey I'd like to reiterate, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, so this is more an exercise in perhaps refreshing your attention on it. On the scale of 1 being a high priority and 9 being low, 69% of respondents marked bike lanes as a 7 or less. Only 14% ranked bike lanes as a 1, a 2, or a 3. I think overwhelmingly the respondents to that survey don't want the bike lanes that are associated with the active transportation program. And I raise that as an important contextual matter here. And the responses for the end of trip bicycle facilities rated even lower, with 85% of respondents rating those as a 7 or less. So essentially saying, no, we don't want them. So let's take those results and put them off to one side. I'd like to comment on the proposed budget itself. At a global level, given the current economic uncertainties, which many observers tonight have already commented on, and the higher inflation overall for the last several years across all other types of expenditures for people, the budget increase of 12.3%, as I read it, and the taxation increase of 13.3%, are vastly over this year's inflation rate. And I'm even more disturbed. I didn't quite realize that the 5-year increase, you're talking about raising the average taxation on the household in Oak Bay by $2,000 a year over the next 5 years. That's a tremendous increase. That's also vastly in excess of the forecasted inflation rates. And I think council really has to take a very hard look at this, because the context for the taxpayer is that the operating costs overall of living in this municipality have shot up. So, for example, my house insurance went up $3,000 a year from 2024 to 2025. In 2015, house insurance for my property was $4,500 a year. It's now $13,000. So your tax increase is not just one thing to be considered by itself, but it has to be considered in a broader context. The BC carbon tax increase, which is coming on April the 1st, will also significantly increase the cost of heating my house and the cost of water. I'm now at probably $4,000 a year for a 4-unit building, which is also double what it was in 2015. So when we look across the board, we're talking about $10,000 worth of increases over a 9-year period, and you're going to hit me with 2 more, notwithstanding anything else. So when you look at this stuff and you look at your percentages, and it says, well, that's only 2% a year or 5% a year, in this case, the sort of average of 10-ish% a year you're talking about, it's a very serious addition to what is an already highly problematic situation for many, many homeowners. So I really would give you the feedback that I think you guys should be looking at this budget and going, well, how do we hold the line on tax increases? Does the building on Carnarvon have to be 20 million? Like, we have to ask some hard questions here now. It's very disturbing. If you compare the average current rate of inflation, we've had a big bump over the last 3 years. It's nowhere near 10% a year. So, guys, I know you're really deep into this process. You're almost at the end of it. People are very loath to make changes to plans that are multiple years in the making. And I understand in particular the comments that many people and some of the councillors tonight have focused in on the amount of the budget that's allocated for the water and sewer remediation. And if there's any priority in this municipal budget, it's to, as quickly as we can, within the context of the engineering constraints and capacity constraints, which were just recently noted, is to focus our expenditures on those core infrastructure requirements of the municipality, and to perhaps step back from some of this other stuff, because the amounts you're talking about are very serious to your average homeowner, right? So I'd like to go on to a further point. I'd like to call your guys' attention to the 5-year budget for the active transportation program and infrastructure. That's 8.8 million between the two line items. So my feedback to you on this one is, 69% of survey respondents don't think that they want the bike lanes, which is the core of the active transformation program. 69% of the people who responded don't think they're needed or important. Now, you may disagree with them, but that's the views that they've expressed through one of the vehicles they have the opportunity to use. In prior feedback to council in early 2024, regarding the McNeil Road changes, which were related to this, I presented to the ICBC accident data for South Oak Bay and demonstrated that the overall accident rates were pretty low, and those on McNeil were extraordinarily low. So the use of road safety as a kind of an argument to drive this, I find somewhat problematic from a data perspective. And if people would like to make a case for that, then I suggest that they would actually bring some actual local data concerning the practical safety improvements that they're talking about. How many fewer accidents, how many fewer issues, et cetera. And I just don't see any of that sort of responsible data being provided at all. So moving on to the next related point to this, which is that myself and many other residents now have seen.
Mr. Roy, I don't want to interrupt you. We try and keep our speakers to around 3 to 5 minutes each, and you're sort of up to about 7. I don't mind you finishing your thoughts. I just want to give you some context if you could be reasonably expedient. But we'll let you say everything you want to say, so please continue.
Well, I totally appreciate that, Mayor, and it's a big budget. There's a lot of stuff going on in there, so you kind of have to pick your tops. If you give me 2 more minutes, I think I'll be finished.
Sounds good, thanks.
Okay. I think if you need to start limiting expenditures, start with this program. And I urge you not to force it forward against the clear preference of the taxpayers. Rescind your prior approval of the whole program. Cut the tax increase scheduled for this year and every future year by the $8 million budgeted. If you want to move forward with an active transportation program that'll have a permanent impact on the majority of residents, put it to the people in a referendum. If you get sufficient support, go ahead. If you don't, stop. I understand there's a vocal minority that supports the active transportation program and includes many of the councillors here. And many of the folks who support that enjoy using what I see as a very lightly used network at the expense of other taxpayers. I don't fault you for this, right? It's a great deal. But I and a lot of other people just disagree, and we oppose taxing the rest of us to support the transportation preferences of a minority. So my overall feedback has to kind of sit on a couple of things. One is the increases are too high in the context of everything else that's going on fiscally for the taxpayers. And number two, focus in on the core things that need to be done and cut the stuff that doesn't need to be done. And three, the active transportation thing is a real sort of hot potato thing. But if you look at the feedback from residents, They don't support it. And I'm not sure why council is going forward with this at sort of warp speed. So I'll bring my comments to a close there, Mayor. Thank you for being patient with me, and I hope it's a perspective on these things that you guys can take under consideration.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Roy. I will, I think you've highlighted many of your cost increases that are reflected in our cost increases, insurance, water, all these sorts of things that we're seeing. Again, you're right, significant cost areas for our operations as well, and those are the ones that often lead to our difficult situations. Our fixed increases are so high. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome, and good luck with it, guys. It's not a hard job, but you might want to pull out that scalpel and cut a few things off of it.
Thank you. Any other people in the room or online that wish to speak to us? We have one person in the room who's coming to the podium.
Maggie Knight, Oak Bay. I wasn't actually planning to speak tonight. I just wanted to understand what the fiscal picture was shaping up to be, but I came down after my kids finally agreed to go to sleep to listen. But I think it seems we're in a moment where bike lanes are the topic du jour. Lots of people have strong opinions. But I did just want to offer some feedback from a different perspective than the previous speaker. Yes, we are an older municipality, but we are not exclusively an older municipality. 31% of Oak Bay residents are between 15 and 49. Another 12 and a bit percent are 14 and under. That is, close to half of us. We matter too. And annual community feedback surveys are important, absolutely. I would also suggest that 1,268 responses that's not opinion polling, it's ranking of importance of issues. I would assume that young families and young people have a much lower response rate on those surveys. I didn't have a chance to look at if there's any demographic information. I don't recall if you collect demographic, and so I forget what the response rate is for those different tiers. But I would hope that you would think not only about the most vocal residents who have the most time on their hands, but also those of us who are in the trenches of young kiddos, and also all the renters in our neighborhood that often don't access that survey in the same way. Those kinds of investments are not just about supporting a quote unquote vocal minority that currently uses biking infrastructure. They're about mode shift. I've been here listening to you talk about climate action, and that mode shift is part of that vision. And without infrastructure, lots of folks will not participate in that mode shift. I would also be interested in the cost of a referendum, which would of course only add to the cost of proceeding with such a project. And the characterization of proceeding with bike lanes at warp speed might be considered deeply comical for anyone who's been paying attention to the policy development trajectory, which as of yet has resulted in about 700 meters of bike lane on Cabra Bay and basically nothing else in over 12 years. So I would just ask that we not overinterpret survey data that represents an important voice, but not the totality of the voice. And in fact, I think it would, if we are planning for the future, and in this budget, we are looking at significant infrastructure costs that are related to Oak Bay undertaxing for many years to the benefit of longstanding homeowners, and expecting newer homeowners to pick up the tab for that moving forward through borrowing costs. So let's think about an intergenerational vision of this as well, and think about investing in the future, not just kind of holding a status quo and paying the least that we can until other generations are around to pick up the tab. I don't want to make it all about intergenerational things, but it is very stark at the moment, the way that younger folks are treated in this municipality sometimes. So I hope that we can move forward with that and make some progress. And I think if council wants to hear those voices, that you should be specifically thinking about how you could welcome those voices into your deliberations, because it's not easy to engage at this time. So thank you for hearing that. Good luck with your deliberations. This is hard work. I, in my professional life, do this at a much smaller scale, and you never want to cut the things. They always matter. And it's all about priorities and values. So I look forward to hearing what council deliberates on and what matters most to you when you think about how to serve the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Knight. All right, back to this. I don't see any other hands from online or in the chambers. So back to this table, we have a number of items in our package for consideration. I've already sort of directed, at least in principle, to kind of include those shift to one-time costs. It's about 1.5%. But there's a number of other items on that list that is shared, which has the tax increase by cost drivers. So perhaps I'll turn it over to members of council. Councillor Smart, I see your hand up online.
Thank you. I just wanted to reply and comment to some of the public input and just remind council that the survey was found to be very lacking in representation of renters and a younger demographic. And because of that, that resulted in a successful motion at the council table about the distribution of future surveys. And also just that it is not actually true that we can assume that people thought active transportation was not important. They simply rated a priority system. They could think all 9 things are important. So it's not actually true to say that by voting that active transportation was the 9th of 9 great priorities, because people could have been in support of all 9. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. I'm going to make maybe some suggestions here. I think one of the ones that was raised by Ms. LaChance earlier was the question of deer management. And if I look at the Urban Wildlife Stewardship Society's proposal to us, I see there's a couple of core pieces there that if you want to make a strong case to the province, I think we do need to continue, and that's the data collection and then the field work, which in their budget is $13,000. I think the social media outreach and public education pieces, I'm fine with not moving forward with that portion of it, and I would be fine. So I might suggest that we move forward in funding them for their core services to the tune of $13,000. And then that would take and essentially allocate the balance back into the thing. So we have, I think, 51,700 in the budget currently for deer management. I appreciate there is a potential for grants coming as well that might be able to allow us to move forward. But it doesn't look like we'll be doing the operational side of the equation this year. So. But I think advancing the UWSS work gives us the best opportunity of seeing the grant and of those pieces. So there is a slight budget benefit here of advancing that and but taking away the unused portion back into the pool. So I might suggest you might look at that as a potential way of moving that. I'm not sure if other folks are in sort of in agreement with that approach. Councillor Appleton, I'm seeing some nodding heads, but.
Just for the purposes of discussion, Your Worship, and for expediency, I would make a motion to that effect that core services for UWSS operations be funded in the way that you described.
So
I would second that.
Okay, so funding it to $13,000 and taking the balance of the budget for deer management out of the building and planning department's budget back into essentially removing that from the budget. Ms. LaChance?
Understood.
Okay. So it's moved and seconded. And then go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I'm not sure yet if I'll support the motion. I would have been more in favor of directing staff to pursue provincial funding and actually, if need be, to so that the cost could be shared, and if need be, to roll it into our grant and aid process so that we could look at it in context with other things that we fund. So I would have been more in favor of that approach, but I will continue to listen to councillors around the table. I'd also prefer some clarification on what impact this motion has to property tax increases. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Ms. LaChance, want to answer the last part?
Yes, thank you for that. And if I could just put a marker that we would also, I was remiss by not offering it sooner, but I should have offered to pass to Ms. Bay on the impact if we reduce that operating expenditure budget, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I'll go ahead and first answer the impact on tax. So when we use that amount in our tracker, so the difference between the 13,000 operating costs and the 51,700, that's a reduction of 38,700 to tax revenue. That would be a 0.1% decrease.
My apologies, I should have put that question to you first before suggesting this. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Lachance is definitely the right person to be answering the questions about the impact on the overall budget. But just in response to some of the comments that were made about the grant and aid program, this is UWSS, I think, would like to continue with their research program as soon as possible. So there is a time component to this and I believe there's a time component to any potential provincial assistance as well. So timeliness is of the essence here in terms of getting some clarity on how this may be funded.
Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate trying to take this, a portion of this out of the budget. I personally would like to see it all come out of the budget because, as you know, I have always said that I believe that all of the funding for anything to do with the deer should be coming from the province because the deer belong to the province. So I will be voting against this motion because I'd like to see it all come out and not just a portion. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Sorry, Councillor Smart, you have your hand up again. I thought you were concluded. Please continue.
Oh, that's okay. It's just follow up on Councillor Braithwaite's. I would like to know what the percentage of property tax decrease would be if it was all taken out of the budget, and also just with regards to if we were successful to get some provincial support, would that still be able to be factored in time and then also potentially reduce the property tax more? Thanks.
Sure. Ms. Lachance, what is the balance? What is the impact of the $13,000? I think I have it at about 0.2%.
Yes, you've got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson? Sorry, Councillor Smart, before I move on, I want to make sure I don't do that again. Are you satisfied? You're done? Okay. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment. I will support the motion. I think that keeping some of the very core aspects of this work on going forward makes sense. I think the chances of the province doing anything in this particular environment right now, with all the other stuff that's going on, are probably very close to zero. So, I think it's prudent for us to for example, support veterinary services for these deer that have been collared, which is included in that 13, I think, and then just let the chips fall where they may with the rest of it. So, and I agree. We can't be continually funding a program that the province refuses to step up and allow us to convert to something else or give us permission to do something different. So, I think this is the right approach.
Thank you. Don't see any other hands on this, so there's a motion live on the floor. I'm going to call the question. This is the question to direct these changes into the budget process. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Braithwaite opposed. That carries, so those changes be made. Yeah, I'm happy to look around the table. If there's any other suggestions, I've got some in my mind that might be viable, but I'm going to say, I appreciate Mr. Roy's comments about the need to cut these things. So much of our budget is core capital work. It's hard to cut things without the fear that it might cause longer-term higher costs. So, Councillor Smart, you have your hand up, and then Councillor Apple, did I see? Okay.
I would be willing to move forward the 3 staff recommendations on one-time cost, non-market change, and WorkSafe.
We've already done that. We've asked them to include that, yeah.
Okay.
At this point, it's...
Thank you.
But we can do it as a motion. Is that cleaner?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's do it as a motion then. Councillor Smart moved. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Smart? Councillor Appleton.
Just if
Patterson?
you're looking for other items that might come out of the 2020, it's not a large one, but it is council priority, special initiatives, 76, the options for an off-leash dog park. It's $48,000, and given everything else that we have in our planning for the year, I think it's lovely to do all of these things, but it is something that I would support removing from this budget, and something that we could do in the future.
Thank you.
It's on page 4 of Appendix 3.
Thank you for the reference. It's always very helpful to have those. I'm going to we'll give it to Ms. Lachance first. She may wish to go to Mr. Heidley for maybe some technical details, but sorry, page 4. Okay. So it is in this year's budget. Thank you for that. Ms. Lachance?
Yes, thank you.
Would you like me to direct it to Mr. Heidley, or?
Yes, just in one moment, I just wanted to help with some context around the special projects, and so particularly for council priority projects. They've already secured one-time funding, so there was commitments from grant monies and reserves to fund all of those council priorities. So it doesn't have a direct correlation back to tax revenue, unfortunately.
Just out of curiosity, though, are those external applied for grants, or are they things like the Growing Community Fund grants, which are more of our own discretion for use? Mr. Heidley. Oh, no. Ms. Atkinson. Oh, that was very smooth. For those who are at home and can't see that, he reached for the microphone and then slowly moved it over to in front of Ms. Atkinson to answer the question. Welcome.
So I absolutely do know the answer, but I need a moment to look up that correlation back to funding source.
Sure.
If we could circle back to that.
Sure. Why don't we give you a second to do that? And if there's other... I always just want to have like a button that I can turn on the Jeopardy theme song or something like that for these moments where things have to be looked up. And I would suggest probably if in ways of motion that for that, maybe it as opposed to just, because it's a council priority and we can't not consider that in the mix of other things, that the motion would be probably to defer that project to 2026 so that we could consider it at that time. It depends where the grant money's coming from, whether that's possible or not. I appreciate that.
My trusted colleague just helped me out with that. It's coming from general fund surplus,
Okay,
so no restrictions on timing.
okay. So why don't you put that motion on to defer it by a year? If there's a seconder, we can debate.
I will make a motion to, sorry, I have to get it back on my screen, to
I'll just say the
defer SP 076 of the council priorities, the options for the off-leash dog park, to defer them until 2026.
moved. Is there a seconder for that motion? Oh, moved and seconded. Thank you. Yours to motivate, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think that although the value of this item in the overall budget is small, I think that the time and the community engagement to perhaps accomplish this task is not costed into this, but it would be more substantial. And just in looking at the overall framework of the budget and the work we have to do and the future planning for the budget, I think this is one of the things that, particularly given that the year is already moving along, it could be quite easily pushed off to 2026.
And this is about a 0.1% tax? Oh, no, there's no tax impact per se, just defers the use of pieces. Fair, yeah. I'll turn to the seconder or any other speakers who wish to speak. Oh, there's Councillor Smart. I was about to call the question. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you. I really do appreciate the thought of, how much community engagement we'll be having this year, and adding that on to the bandwidth of the public. It's a hard decision for me, but I don't think I'll be supporting the motion because I have heard from so much of the community with a desire to look at another space, especially when people are trying to respect not having off-leash dogs at the beaches. So I won't be supporting the motion, but I really do appreciate it being brought up to consider.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Braithwaite, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think I would have to agree with Councillor Smart on this one. So I will be voting against the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to call the question then, not seeing any other discussion. All those in favor? And those opposed? I have Councillor Smart, Braithwaite, Watson, and Appleton opposed. That does not pass, so thank you. The other things I was going to just raise as a question, and I hate to put our fire chief on the vent here, but it's just of all of the staffing pieces, the mostly nuanced, integrated pieces. What we have in front of us for the fire is we made a commitment to increase the staffing levels. I believe it was over 8 years or 6 years to meet the necessary staffing levels for to meet our service levels. It does stand out, and it's sort of unfortunate sometimes when you poke your head up that these things can be at risk. I might just put forward as a suggestion, and really, I guess really by emotion, if there's nobody else who wishes to address or talk about it, then things. So I'll move that we consider the fire staffing capacity, which is a item on the agenda of 200,000 or 0.7%. To be considered for removal from this year's budget.
I'll second for discussion.
Okay. Before I do really much motivation on this one, I might just turn to the fire chief to understand a little bit about, I know the cost of deferral means that we're not going to get to our staffing levels in the time that we would like to. We're already stretched it out further than we were hoping to at the beginning of all this. But I just perhaps... maybe I'll give it to Ms. LaChance if you want to answer this in any way, but it's probably more appropriate for the fire chief just to get a sense of what the impact would be if we did defer this by 1 year. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to remind everyone, the Fire Master Plan had a recommendation of a staffing model that recommended a total of 10 personnel, 8 firefighters and 2 assistant chiefs. At this point, we have hired 4 out of the 10, and we have restructured the department. So we now have more management staff working on a Monday to Friday basis. And we have done some improvements on our fire suppression staffing. The primary gap we're going to have is our what's called our staffing factor, where we will still be running with an understrength staffing factor, and if we don't continue to address it, then we will have higher than above average overtime costs. That's really the simplest way of putting it. But however, it's open for council's direction on the plan as we move forward.
For that, Chief. Again, I think all the options in front of us is not a terribly palatable one, but if we want to try and have a chance of getting this down to somewhere close to 10 or below 10, I think we're going to have to look at some unpalatable options. So I put it out there and happy to have the debate on it. Councillor Smart?
Well, thank you. Through Mayor to Chief McDonald, I guess I just wanted to ask, what I'm hearing is that, of course, this is not something anybody wants to do, but if council were to delay this funding by 1 year, it wouldn't mean that we weren't going ahead with our overall plan. It would just be stretching the concept that we have now.
That's the intent of this, at least, but Chief?
Through the chair, if we were to defer by 1 year, then we can continue to operate within budget. However, to maintain our minimum staffing levels, we have to rely on overtime to support our minimum staffing levels on an increasing basis. The bigger argument is the impact to mental health of our firefighters on working above average hourly work weeks. And then the longer term impact, which we've talked about previously, as far as the impact to our WorkSafe premiums, which we've also talked about tonight. Fire has had a pretty lengthy track record over the last 6-7 years, where we have had some extremely high WorkSafe related claims, and that is part of the piece that we're trying to resolve by improving our staffing factor as well as addressing service levels.
Smart?
Thanks. Through you, Mayor, to Chief McDonald, is it possible to give us a sense, like, obviously I hate to have this conversation, none of us want this, but to how much overtime is currently occurring? Are you able to give us sort of a sense of how dire this is, like how critical it is to have this funding this year?
To you, Chief.
Through the chair, so in 2024 we had an approved overtime budget of $230,000, and our actual to support our minimum staffing and the suppression division was a little over $450,000. So a lot of that comes down to where we're at and with attrition and our ability to hire and recruit and retain staff. It is an ongoing challenge, but if we don't have an adequate staffing factor, we are really susceptible to fluctuations in staffing, and we have to absorb that through overtime to maintain minimum staffing while we go through recruiting, training, and onboarding processes, which are not they're not fast processes, unfortunately.
Thank you. I'm going to just give one other question here to Chief. What's the, I guess, is this a malleable number, i.e. if we were to say instead of 200,000, it was 100,000, does that make any sense? Or is it just really that number because that's the loaded cost to get a full-time plus equipment plus et cetera for that? I'm trying to get a sense of, is this a malleable figure, or is it sort of this or nothing?
Through to the chair, the way the staffing plan was built out was really built around trying to get the financing in place, not the headcount in place, on an evenly implemented program. Comes down with getting the funding in place. So the end of the 10-year period, we have adequate funding to support 8 firefighters and 2 assistant chiefs. But when those individuals come into the budget or into the operating cycle, is somewhat dependent upon what the department needs are at the time, which is why it's hard for me to kind of clearly articulate, what we need. However, if you were to reduce the amount this year as opposed to eliminate it entirely, yes, it would have a beneficial impact. We can hire people partway through the year, or we can at least hire some temporary full-time staff to help reduce.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you. It's just a comment, really, and an observation about the situation that we're sitting in right now. That looking forward, the timing of our adoption of the provisional police budget makes it very difficult to have an equivalent conversation with the police board and our police chief at this point in time, and that going forward, it would be nice to see if that changed, because it's really hard at the 11 minutes to midnight to be turning to other priorities which are equivalent, and yet having one thing on our list which we've really been told we can't touch. So I'm struggling with that a bit, and wondering if that's something to think about going forward. It's not to say that that police budget couldn't come in earlier, and that we don't need to, or that there needs to be some change in the timing of this process, because we have. And it's not to say that I wouldn't want to hear the arguments for the traffic enforcement officer in more detail, but at this point in time, we can't even ask the question, really. So that's a comment. The other comment is really just more broadly. It's about the whole thing and about the notion that somehow or another we have to reduce this to 10% increase or less. And I struggle with that, actually, when I look at the work plan, the commitments we've made, what we're hearing from the community, on keeping our eyes on the prize with respect to asset management and capital reserves in order to do that. And I looked at my own household budget and thought, if it really is 10%, and that was going to take it down to like $442 of expenditure for an individual household as opposed to $542, which is kind of what we're aiming for here, how would I take that $100 out of my household budget and say, I think it's worth it for my community to spend that $100? And I know we represent a broad, we are speaking here as a governance body for a broad cross-section of people and households and family situations. But it honestly was not difficult for me to see how I could make small adjustments to how I behave in order to have $100 to support the important work of our community in doing the things that the community values. So I am really struggling with this exercise. There is nothing here that I want to take off the table. And I may not be voting for any of the things you suggest if they come up, because, not to be flippant, but I said to myself, I got a huge property insurance increase. It was of the same order of magnitude. And how did I have to respond to that? I couldn't pay it, so I adjusted some of my deductibles in order to bring down the cost. Now, maybe not everybody can do that or wants to think about that, but we all have to make these choices in our households about how we spend our money. I could get rid of my Netflix subscription. I don't want to suggest that I'm like, that's a privileged thing. I could go down to the basic package and save myself easily $100 a year instead of, having X number of options. I could have one, literally I could say I'm going to have one less Tim Hortons coffee a week, and I've saved $100 over the course of a year. And I don't want to sound flippant about this, but I really thought about it for any household. Could they make these adjustments? I could never buy organic produce and say I'm just going to go to regular produce, because I could easily save myself $100 a year if I made that choice. So that's my comment about the exercise. I find it very difficult, and I'm not sure it's necessary.
Fair. I think that's a very valid point of view. You triggered me to sort of do a little check-in, though. So why don't I do that before I go to Councillor Patterson about, given the direction we've given so far, and I'm leaving the motion that's on the table just alone for a second, where are we at in terms of where the tax lift is, both from a percentage and a cost per household basis?
So to you, Chair, for decisions and motions approved so far, we're at 4.2 million after the reductions and 11.8%.
11.8%?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Councillor Patterson. We're speaking to the motion for consideration right now.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I do have difficulty with this one. And it is fine to talk about holding to a percentage of previous years. The difficulty is if those previous years were underfunded, then that means you would always be held to that underfunding, and we wouldn't be able to remedy some of the things that we need to do. I guess in terms of the fire and emergency services budget, I do note that we've gone from 4 assistant chiefs to just 2 and increased the firefighting component. So I think that was a strategic move to right size and right staff the department. But I also keep in mind that we have charged our fire chief to also getting our emergency and disaster management program up to speed. And there is, at least in my opinion, a considerable amount of work that is required to tackle that. It has not been done in the past. And so that in itself, in some places, would be a sole position to get a lot of that going. And but in the District of Oak Bay, it falls to our fire chief. And so I think I would have difficulty reducing the staff, the firefighting staff, and at the same time having a greater expectation for that department to also take on the broader objective of emergency planning.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Motion to the floor. I'm open to if there's maybe amendments to change it from the full amount removal or not, but otherwise I'll move on to the question. Councillor Braithwaite.
I was actually just going to do that now, Mayor. I was going to make a suggestion that perhaps we amend it to not the full amount, but a half of the amount, based on what I heard the chief say, that we could hire somebody halfway throughout the year.
Suggestion is to amend the motion to reflect instead of a reduction of 200,000, a reduction of 100,000. Moved and seconded. Okay, thank you. So the motion right now is for amendment. I see a lot of hands popping up on the amendment. I'm going to call the question on the amendment. Again, that if the amendment passes, it changes the motion from a reduction of 200,000 to a reduction of 100,000. It does not pass it. It just, we'll be debating the 100,000 after if this passes. All those in, sorry, Ms. Lachance.
Just for clarity for council, the version where you're citing the 200,000 would be a rounded number? Or
Yes, sorry.
And so just to make sure that the motion depicts the actual amount, so 50% would be
50%.
123,700.
Okay, thank you. So reduction to 50%. Thank you for that. My apologies. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. So we are now debating a motion to reduce the fire services amount by half. Oh, there we go. We've already had a discussion on this largely, so this is really, I think, it's a hard one. I wanted to bring it forward. I'll say I moved it, and I think there is some validation of it, but I appreciate it comes with trade-offs, absolutely. So I totally respect any decision that's made on this one, whichever way the council wishes to go. I don't see any other discussion, so I'm going to call the question. The motion right now is to reduce the fire, the increase here that's loaded by 1/2. All those in favor? And those opposed? I have Councillor Watson opposed. That carries. Our apologies, Chief, victim of fiscal prudence. And the only other thing I had on my list of things is potential, and this really goes against the grain for me, but I'm going to move it at least for conversation. And it does go against our sort of standards of pieces, but I'll move that both the capital pieces here, the asset management, which we've committed to 2% to reduce that by half, and the active transportation, which we've committed to by 0.6% to reduce that by half. And just
Second.
Moved and seconded. I don't need to motivate this very much because I'm not very motivated by it. I think the better financial planning is to fund our capital planning process as we have set out to do. I think in the long run, we know we need to cover these costs. What this effectively would do is extend the end date of our increases by at least half a year, or extend it by, yeah. So I think this has got negatives to it, so it really comes down to philosophically how much we're trying to mitigate the costs this year. And I'm really just putting it out there for discussion because I think it needs to be talked about as a philosophical piece. We're in a very large tax increase realm, and this would get us down much closer to the 10% level. I'll go to I see a hand online of Councillor Smart. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm first wondering if we can sever the two. And my second question is, through you, Mayor, could staff just describe what the ramifications would be of reducing the active transportation budget? I thought it was related to a staffing position we just hired. So just would like clarity on what the impacts would be of reducing the active transportation budget. And I'm assuming that's just for this year. Thanks.
Mr. Shantz?
Just for some clarity, I believe that question is in addition to the matter that you just put forward. Your matter was related to the asset management, which is separate from active funding for active transportation.
My apologies. The active transportation line item there, what is that,
Oh, that's
amount
the one
for?
that you are grabbing. Okay, sorry, I heard asset management.
Oh, sorry.
My
Active
apologies,
transportation?
everyone. Yeah.
No, did I? Okay. So
Okay.
I suggested that because I saw the active transportation as a capital,
Yeah.
increase in capital
Yeah.
reserves. So I thought, in fairness, if we're going to talk about reducing our committed funding of capital funding, then we should probably look at both of those equally, not separate them. I am happy to separate to cleave the motion when it comes time to vote, Councillor Smart, but that was the logic of grouping them. Sorry, my voice is...
You're following suit. So just to get clarity on the amounts that you had mentioned, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Nope, no problem. I just suggested that both be cut by half.
Okay, perfect.
So effectively,
And then if I may, I would invite Mr. Rennick to jump in on the implications of the reduction.
yeah, I think that's entirely appropriate. Thank you very much. Mr.
I
Rennick.
can buy him some, are you ready? Okay.
Through the mayor, to the direct question that was asked as to whether it would have an impact on the staff, it would not have an impact on that staff position because that envelope funds both the staff position who will be delivering those projects as well as the projects themselves. I am not, unfortunately, as much of an accounting whiz as my colleague, and I am not able to immediately quantify what the impact of this reduction would be on the overall funding envelope. I would say that what it would mean is that fewer of the projects in the plan that council endorsed will be able to be constructed in 5 years. However, how many of those projects would be impacted, that's not something that I'm able to calculate on the spot.
Thank you. And just for those watching, if not clear, it's a reduction of the asset management pool by about 350,000 and of the active transportation by about 100,000.
And if I
The
may-
increase, not a reduction, but a reduction of the proposed increase. Please go
Yes,
ahead.
thank you for that clarity. That's extremely helpful. And then just to add in, and this is probably just a reminder for council, but the active transportation funding was a decision last year. As part of that decision, it was planned phased implementation. And so this is basically just, if I can get clarity on that as well, just the reduction for this year. If we reduce the entire planned envelope, then it would absolutely have an impact on the number of projects that can be delivered.
For absolute clarity, this is a reduction, looking at a 1 year reduction with the total intended funding into those reserves maintain, so this is really just stretching the funding envelope if this were to pass. Just like the asset management, the intention obviously would be still fully funded, it's just get stretched out by another half a year or so. Councillor, I think Councillor Smart's already spoken. Councillor, go ahead, Councillor Appleton, and I'll go back to Councillor Smart.
Thank you, Worship. But just for clarity here, we have two components here, and I understand that you may sever them, but we're talking about the asset management component and the active transportation component. And from what I understand, we're talking about different types of impact from the two things, because the active transportation, Ms. LaChance and Mr. Rennick have just described, there is an operational implementation impact to the active transportation, whereas the asset management component is a year-over-year contribution to reserves, an additional contribution to reserves above and beyond. So there is not an immediate operational impact from the asset management change in funding. Rather, we're just adding less to the infrastructure reserve in that case. But with the active transportation, it's different because we're actually talking about operational impact.
Mr. Shantz?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'll definitely take a run at that and then probably ask for some help. So there is a right distinction between the active transportation transfer, that is a funded program for a specified number of projects, with funding to be raised over a number of years. Asset management levy or reserve transfer is being set to reach a certain level and continue into the future. And so it doesn't have a direct correlation back to a project, and for the reduction or the deferral. So we would just continue to catch up with our climb to the target level in the next year, would have no immediate impact on the capital program.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So we're funding our active transportation out of reserves currently, correct? So I'm clear?
That's correct.
So how does this money then go? And probably a bad assumption on my part, so I just want to make sure where I'm at on this. So is the money that's here then not going into that reserve, and then we'll pull the money out of reserves to fund the capital projects? That was my read of it, but I might be wrong here.
Yeah. So you're absolutely correct. So to you, Chair, you're absolutely correct. They're both transfers to reserve. But the active transportation has other or one-time offsets. So it has some existing reserves or I believe grants. I'll have to double check on that fact to help ease in. So the idea is that they're in the capital plan. There's an approximately $800,000 planned capital expenditure. The scope was initially discussed as a 9-project program. I will have to defer if we want to get more detail on that, but ultimately we're phasing in the total funding that was required. So in order to deliver that program, there needs to be somewhere in around $1 million a year being contributed and being expended on those projects. So at the end, there will be zero. It is a reserve that's there, but if you sort of switch hats over to the infrastructure reserve, there will be a balance that continues on into the future there. So I hope that helps in terms of they're both reserves, both reserve transfers, but one is a finite amount that will be expended through the planned period, and the other is establishing reserves for future replacement.
Yeah, fair. One's essentially eternally recycling, and one is essentially for the projects that we have on the books. Councillor Smart? Oh, sorry, Councillor Appleton, did you want to? No, it's all fine. Okay, Councillor Smart, and then Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thank you through you, Mayor, to Mr. Rennick. I just wanted to clarify again, because I feel like I heard a few slightly different things. So I believe I heard you say that it's possible that there may be a delay in overall project schedule if we were to make this cut on active transportation, but I wanted to make sure that I understood that correctly, because we already have a 5-year plan that we're stretching to 10. So in not funding this, we could be going further than 10 years. Thanks for clarifying.
Mr. Rennick?
Through the mayor, just to be very clear, I would need to do a truing up of how much money becomes available for expenditure in each year if this motion were to pass. And the comment that I made earlier was essentially that I'm not able to do that truing up in this meeting in a timely manner.
Thank you for that. Anything else, Councillor Smart?
No, thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Thank you. I just would like to make a comment maybe it's a question and then so it will go into the public record, but I just wanted to confirm, because there are interested people even here tonight and maybe others online, and that the Quick Wins neighborhood bikeways that were here and discussed and kind of came to a stalemate on Monday are already accounted for in capital funds set aside, right? So that this is not affecting the viability of those projects, however we decide what to do with them. So I just wanted a confirmation of that really on the record.
Mr. Shantz?
Apologies, I would just need clarification on which capital plan item that we were referring to.
Well, there was a $1.8 million estimate for the bikeways that we're getting close to approving. So I think the question was, does this increase or lessened increase in the funding of Active Transportation Reserve, does that put that project at risk? Is that fair? Yes, Ms. Plouffe?
Thank you, Your Worship. We are at the 3-hour mark from the commencement of this meeting, so if we could have a motion to extend.
I had the wrong start time. I apologize. I
Thank
had it
you.
at 9:30 or 6:30. Can I have a motion to extend by half an hour? I do think we're pretty close to finishing. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Thank you for that, Ms. Plouffe.
By the equivalent, yeah. That is 100,000.
Please go ahead. My understanding of that was that the project was essentially funded. I didn't think that it required an additional increase to cover it, but
So-
Mrs. Chance?
So I'll be happy to provide some information. To you, Chair, ultimately the delivery of those projects underneath that funding envelope, I'll call it, is limited by the amount of money that is contributed. The phase-in was I'll call it the absolute minimum to be able to still meet the pace and scope. So the timing and scope, so the actual cash flows that were originally contemplated when those contributions were approved. We're considering cutting that in half, and so there will be an implication on the program and the annual spending. And I'm happy to pass over if that's okay with you, Chair.
Mr. Rennick.
Thank you very much, Chair, for indulging a brief whispered conversation between Ms. LaChance and I. The proposed motion would not impact the district's ability to construct the Henderson and Haltane projects were they to be endorsed by council. It would simply impact which funding sources are used for them. As was already alluded to Monday night, these projects tend to be funded from a number of different pots. And this would simply we would slightly need to adjust how much came out of each pot, but it would not materially impact the ability to construct these projects should council so direct.
Thank you for that. Councilor Watson?
Yeah, thank you. And then we still have a single motion on the floor. I'm not quite sure where we are with respect to motions for these items. That would be helpful because then I may or not say anything at the moment, but I might.
Right, no, I think we should discuss both. I think they're essentially, philosophically at least, related, and we can separate the motions if that's desired.
I think that one thing I do hear from the community in all sorts of feedback we've gotten is that they are willing to stay the course with respect to asset management and the funding of that reserve. And it would be a bad decision to actually cut back on this year's or the 2025 planned contribution to the fund. As Ms. LaChance already pointed out, it gets us to a certain level in a responsible way, but it still doesn't account for the underlying deficit or, with respect to the state of the infrastructure. And we, as she said, we are in the business of providing utilities, and not providing adequate support for that is not doing our jobs properly, in my view. And although it may still come our way, nobody wants to be Calgary in the summer of 2024. And we set ourselves up for that risk the more we take opportunities to put off what needs to be done. So I will not be supporting any reduction in the contribution to the asset management.
Thank you for that. I have Councillor Smart and Councillor Appleton.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question and a comment. My question is just, again, great to hear about the funding wouldn't be an issue for active transportation, but again, I still feel like I have some doubts around whether the schedule might be impacted. And so if I could have clarification on that, is there absolutely no risk of having a schedule delay with the active transportation projects?
They're conferring here in the room, Councillor Smart, so just give us a second. Lots of conferring. You asked a tough question, apparently. We'll just have to.
Through the mayor, having now been able to confirm what the impact of this decision would be on the total funding envelope, I do not see it having a significant delay to the schedule. It would be inopportune to lose that amount of funding because it would decrease our ability to do things like community consultations. And I'd be wary of, would there be future changes to this envelope? But the impact of the motion here, I do not see it materially delaying the implementation schedule.
Thank you for those, for the broader comments as well. I think it's very helpful. We all, certainly there's impacts no matter what you do on these things. I'm going to put this into context for council as well. The asset management is about a 1%. We're talking about approximately 1%. Actually, pretty accurately 1% for the halving, and the active transportation approximately 0.3%. So combined, a total of 1.3% reduction. Just so we have that sort of number in our mind in terms of what we're talking about. Councillor Smart, your hand is still up. Did you wish to speak again?
Yes, because it seems like comments have begun. I just wanted to comment if that's appropriate.
It is. We have motions on the floor, so please comment.
So I won't be supporting the active transportation, especially around our recent concerns with community consultation. I don't want to send the message that we're just going to further whittle away active transportation. The community is already feeling like we're never going to move that forward, so I won't be supporting that particular motion. Should we sever them? I'm very hesitant to support reducing our asset management, but if there was 1 year in which to do it, I do feel like this would be the year, because we are supporting an almost 1%, a 0.9% property tax increase for the extra public works positions to support our infrastructure. So conceptually, I feel like we are contributing almost 2% of property taxes in a different way. But I'm not sure how I'm going to vote on that yet, should they be separated. But that's the only reason I'm somewhat considering it, because I do really respect and appreciate our asset management plan.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton, did you have your hand? Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I think most members of council are more or less, thinking along the same lines with this, that nobody likes to entertain these types of reductions. I guess what I am reflecting on specifically with the asset management component is that the 2% year-over-year additional contribution to asset reserves was always quite ambitious. Like, it was a significant commitment on behalf of council. Very few other councils or other councils made a commitment to that type of contribution. So from its very, and as the mayor referred to earlier, even before that 2% year over year was agreed to, there were one-time contributions and bump ups that were made even before that, recognizing how far we had to go. So I'm reflecting here on the fact that 2% year over year, we have seen it now for a number of years and have explained and sort of contextualized it for the community as being a significant burden to bear, but accelerating into asset management in the way that we feel is necessary. And so I am of the mind, I am not fond of the idea of having to reduce in a 1 year period for this, but I'm comfortable supporting it in this context because we have made such a significant upfront investment, and that 2% year over year again is a significant contribution. Even 1% is a good contribution above and beyond what we would normally be doing. So It's not my favorite thing to do, but I see it as a temporary reduction in something that was always highly ambitious, and we can take great pride in that. Nevertheless, the proposed tax increase for this year is, as has been mentioned, very high. And it's clear to me that we are thinking proactively into the next phase of asset management, which relies quite a bit on borrowing. So we're moving into that next phase of asset management. So I see nothing in this 5-year plan that does not communicate to the public that the District of Oak Bay is not heavily invested in asset renewal. I mean, it is clearly there. So it's not my favorite thing to do, but I would support that aspect of it. I'm not going to support the motion to reduce the active transportation budget, and the main reason for that is twofold. Number one, Council will recall that we've already adjusted the timelines on this once. We've already done a fairly significant reduction of the budget and adjusted the associated timelines as of last year's financial plan. So I would remind Council that we've already had a go at reducing the expenses associated with active transportation. And particularly, as Mr. Rennick mentioned, I'm concerned about the impacts to staff's ability to communicate with the public with respect to active transportation. Certainly what we heard on Monday night is that folks really want to have a really strong input to active transportation projects, and we've communicated to the community on a number of different occasions that when detailed designs for active transportation projects come before the public, that we will have that dialogue with the community. And so I would really hate to have that compromise, the ability to do that compromised, and really to be able to hear from folks on that aspect of things. So I see these two things as slightly different in the sense that the active transportation contribution, as has been described, goes into a finite project, a finite scope, which we've already extended and drawn out and trimmed resources from already. So I think that that's already been adjusted in my mind. I would like to see it remain where it is. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. I think there's a little bit nitpicking, but just a little, I think, clarification. I believe last year we reduced the number of staff. We were looking at putting in 2 staff for active transportation. We reduced it to 1. So that was the reduction. It didn't reduce the capital last year. I think that was the difference. And I think we officially kept the 5-year timeline, but that is, with the change of the staffing, that made it very difficult to meet that 5-year timeline because we felt the workload to get to the time here. So put it all on the table. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I will speak in favor of both of the reductions. My rationalization, and I appreciate Councillor Watson's perspective and Councillor Appleton's on the asset management. We have we knew going into the start of it, it was a fairly aggressive contribution to assets, particularly given what had not been done in the years before. So we've made some good progress on that. We have more planning to do for debt management to really move those projects forward. We have operationalized a higher level of certainly service to road repair and some of the sidewalk repairs and just throughout all of the work we're doing, signals and traffic and just all of that. So we have upped the operational budgets, and so I think perhaps the progress is not as robust as we would like to see it, but I think that given the size of our budgets and what has been accomplished, I also keep in mind that there has been some difficulty in scaling up the capital projects so that we actually have not been able to expend the monies in the reserve funds over the years, and we will certainly, I think, ramp up on that as we move forward. But it's still in the early stages, so I think the 1% difference this year is not something that we cannot make up for relatively in positive ways in the future. With the active transportation, bike lanes really, I understand the the desire to move this forward. And again, I think there are a lot of members of the community that would like to see it happen. But these are new assets. And so this is new expenses to our budgets and increasing expenses to our budgets. And at this time, with what we're faced with, I think it's prudent to retain some of what we can do and revisit the time and scheduling, particularly once we have a better opportunity to understand a longer-term financial plan and the debt management that is proposed going forward. So I will support these for this budget cycle.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Braithwaite, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Yeah, as far as the active transportation goes, yeah, I would agree with my council colleagues with their comments, so I won't add to that at all because they came up with some good reasoning. I heard around this table last week that we needed to be very heavy in our cutting. We needed to cut whether it was 0.1%, 0.2%, 0.3%. So, and I think it's very hard what we just did to cut the fire budget by 50%. And then to not cut active transportation by 0.3%, I find that really difficult. I think that we should be cutting the active transportation by 0.3% because honestly, to cut in fire and then not cut in active transportation, that just boggles my mind. I don't understand why we would do that because the fire service is an essential service. I think we've heard arguments around the table about how this could affect the active transportation a little bit, but not really badly. I think I heard Mr. Rennick say that. And I also heard that this money might not, this money would have gone towards consultation. Well, I'm not sure. Could we actually say that this money that we're cutting out of that we could cut out of the budget would go to consultation, or would it, how can we say that it would be earmarked for consultation? Would there not be other money in the budget for consultation? So I'm having a very difficult time with that. So I will support the asset management reduction, and I will support the active transportation reduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braithwaite. So I'll speak to the motions. I will separate these because it's been asked of council, and I like to give, and certainly a number of people have asked that, have different opinions of which direction to go in. Hearing the discussion here today, I'm really struggling with supporting one and not the other. I think we should either cut both or cut none. And I do differentiate significantly between the police, which is a recurring cost, time over time, versus a contribution to a reserve. I put this motion forward because I think it needed to be discussed. There is just because we have such a large tax increase, but I was reticent to do so just because I think it's been a brave council that's continued to keep the funding of the asset replacement. Even at 2%, of course, is not keeping up with inflation. And it's necessary, and it is life and safety. This is, if we don't get water, talking about utility model, this is the core of what we have to provide. So I think I'm very proud of the council for doing that, and so I could support it, I think, if it was an across the board, if we just sort of accepted that we're just doing our contributions to reserves, increases to contributions to reserves consistently, we're doing a consistent cut across, but I'm not hearing that, so I don't think I'm going to support either one of these, just because I think we would not like to see one go and not the other. So that's sort of where I'm ending up at all this, and I haven't done the math to see where we're ending up on this one. To be totally honest, I'm not sure where this is gonna end up. Any other discussion before I call the question? I'll separate them. I'll just do them in the order of the sheet here, which is asset management first. So separating the motion. The motion is to reduce by half the contribution to asset management in the year 2025. Sorry, reduce by half the increase in contribution to asset management, not the good grief, that would be a terrible. So that's moved and seconded already. I'm just separating them. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? I have Councillor Appleton and Smart in favor? All those opposed? I have Watson, Patterson, and myself opposed. So Councillor Braithwaite, you're opposed as well, so that fails. And moving to active transportation, again, cutting in half the increase, not the amount of contribution. I'll call the question on that one. All those in favor? And all those opposed? I have Councillor Smart, Watson, Appleton, and Murdoch opposed. So that fails. So both fail. So I'm glad we had the debate. I think it was a really important debate to have, but I do also really respect that outcome because I think it signals a commitment to the projects that we have at hand. Of course, the asset management is different in the sense that there's multiple years of very large projects. The specifics on the active transportation will be back to this table for specific approvals and guidance as well. All right, I don't have anything else on my notes. I think you gave us the update of where we were before we started that process, but can you just remind us where we are in terms of the overall tax increase at this point?
Yes, absolutely. To you, Chair, I haven't yet updated you after the fire reduction. So the total now is $4.1 million change in tax requisition year over year with 11.4% change rate, sorry.
So that's where we are at currently. So I'll turn my head to the table here. If there's any other suggestions, if not, I would probably seek a motion to direct staff to go forward and bring back a financial plan based on the discussions that we've had here today. I don't think there's any other motions that you require, and outside of changes made at this table, Ms. LaChance?
That's correct.
Okay.
Just, it would be option, I'll look at my colleagues, I think it's option 2. So the financial plan as presented would be amended as directed. And then there would be the direction for staff to proceed to bylaw.
Okay. Are there any other items that people wish to raise at this point? Okay. Then why don't I get a motion to that effect, that the staff be directed to bring back, this be approved and that the financial plan be brought back for approval for council. Moved.
So move.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Or seconder? Moved and seconded. The motion now is live on the floor to move this forward. Is there any other discussion? I'm not seeing any. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. You have direction. I am going to just I have a motion arising that I'd like to just bring forward for those here, and if it gets a seconder, I will provide a little motivation. Actually two. One, I think, relates to the deer, and I think I would appreciate a motion from council directing me to seek a meeting with the province to see if we can resolve operational implementation of the deer program. That would just a resolution from council would help me get that meeting, I think. So if that's a.
So moved, Your Worship.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Any discussion on that? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. I'm glad we have water at the table. And the other one I was going to ask is significantly larger, is that the motion would be that the mayor be directed to reach out to other public recreation service providers in the region to inquire to a coordinated approach to bringing regional recreation recovery rates to a target of 70 to 80%. So there's a seconder. I'll speak to that. Moved and seconded. Thank you. I actually have some notes here so I don't get this wrong. So Oak Bay Rec Center saw almost 1.5 million visitors last year. It's making us a service provider to Saanich, Victoria, and of course, the 30,000 plus Camosun and UVic students in addition to our 18,000 residents. We do this currently at about a 60% recovery rate, which is pretty normal for the region. But it means that because we carry such a large recreation burden, it's a very large taxpayer subsidy. About $6.4 million of our budget is that subsidy. I think, put that another way, every 2% increase in recovery rates would bring in about result in about a 1% tax reduction. So it's one of the few areas that we have a potential of significantly reducing our tax load to our residents. It also, though, those rates don't reflect, that's reflecting our operational costs in fully amortized buildings. And we haven't, as we saw in Victoria, a pretty substantial cost to replacement buildings for recreation. What we do right now is put a regular comparison with other recreation centers in the region, and we're on par. But regionally, for all of us over many years, but particularly through COVID, when we were required to have a fee freeze, municipal rate increases have fallen way behind inflation and certainly way behind private recreation services. And that reduction is really resulted in limits to buying equipment and more substantively, of course, building replacement costs. I think we have to consider this in the context of potential impact. But to put this in some context, like a $5 fee for something like a swim or a gym would be $6, would be exceeding the 80% target. So it's that kind of change. And I would point out, if we could get there as a region, it would really free us up to do more in the way of subsidizing people in need for hardship purposes. So I do believe we couldn't address this issue alone. I don't think Oak Bay could change our fees substantively, and we had an economic assessment that said that we couldn't go separately from other jurisdictions. So to my mind, if council is willing to direct me to do this, then I would go out and reach out to some of the other recreation providers, which is West Shore Parks and Rec, and the other CRD providers, as well as Saanich, Victoria, et cetera. So that's the rationale for it. And nothing may come of this, but I think it's worth exploring given the large tax burdens that we are currently facing. Councillor Smart.
Would you mind just repeating the motion one more time slowly? Thank you.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. My apologies. The motion is that the mayor be directed to reach out to other public recreation service providers in the region to inquire about their interest in a coordinated approach to bringing regional recreation recovery rates to a target of 70 to 80%. And they're currently at about 60%. That's not part of the motion.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Councillor Appleton, and then Watson.
Question, Your Worship. So then I gather this to mean that it would, what you're looking, because it has been not necessarily specified practice, but generally the way things happen, that our adjacent municipalities tend to mirror each other in terms of user fees, or at least user fees are fairly close to each other. So the idea being that if everybody collectively decided to raise fees or decided to adjust their fees, that there would be some value in doing them in a coordinated fashion. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Second question, is there not some kind of, and it may not exist, but is there a coordinated body or some sort of structure in which the different recreation associations, our senior recreation staff and our directors of recreation, do they meet with their counterparts in a structured way in a venue that I'm not aware of?
Ms. Atkinson, there is certainly cross-pollination there, but I'm not sure if there's a regular meeting of any kind. This would be more of a board decision than a staff piece, but Ms. Atkinson?
We do have, it's not a formal group with a set mandate, but we do have an intermunicipal directors group. We have intermunicipal managers group, and every year we share proposed fees and charges before bringing them forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Yes, thank you. This was an item I'd flagged when I was actually going through the materials. But just further to your motion, the fact that the recovery rates might match up doesn't really speak to the actual fees and charges themselves, because it really depends on what the underlying budgets are. So I'm not having a conversation about recovery rates per se might really not be the conversation we need to have. It has to be about equalized fees or something. I know we've had discussions here about what the price elasticity of demand is for recreational services. And I guess if everybody was, if we sort of created a monopoly amongst all the different providers.
Councillor Watson, I'm just going to ask, can I just ask to extend the meeting by 15 minutes, just because otherwise we're going to run out of time on this. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed, none opposed. Please continue, Councillor Watson.
If we ended up with a system where all the fees were the same, we're kind of a unified provider of the services across the region, which, may or may not be a good thing. Maybe we should be, maybe there should be some opportunity for people to do things differently and set their fees differently. So I'm not quite sure where this would end up, but have a conversation about it, but there's a lot packed into that proposal.
There is a lot. So maybe it might help. One of the rationale I use for the language of that range, for one thing, because I think we're going to be still different, and not tying it to user fees. There's currently a bit of difference, and certainly, a fee access for, say, swimming in a 50-meter pool versus a 25-meter pool might be different. The quality of a gym might drive different fee rates. So the thought here is that if we can all raise our game a little bit, in truth, Oak Bay is fairly unique in what a huge impact our Parks and Rec has on our budget. Most areas are not quite so impacted. I appreciate this is probably going to make me a bad guy if I go forward with this, but I just think it's worth having a conversation as a region that, what is a reasonable level of subsidy is a reasonable question, and I'm sure we'll get feedback from that from other bodies. It really is, to my mind, a political discussion, not a staff discussion. I think it does have to have. Are we philosophically okay with that sort of 60% range? We've traditionally many years been in closer to 70 range, but it's but we're down at 60, and there's no real path out of it at this point. So I think it might be worthwhile for us to talk as a region. That's the rationale for the range and not focusing on fees as much as the recovery rate.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I support certainly going forward and have the conversation, but Oak Bay is at a distinct disadvantage compared to other municipalities because we are very heavy in recreational facilities in the community, so the percentage of our budget is extreme. But I'm also aware that there are other sections in the region where they actually have policies, and it's based on it's social values as to how they do their financial modeling of recovery, and so, it might be a worthwhile conversation. However, that would be a broader philosophical issue for those communities to consider changing it. So I just point that out.
If I start the conversation, I'll learn a lot about what's coming, what's on the piece. Any other discussion on this? Not seeing any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Thank you for that support. I think it's a conversation worth having. Nothing may come of this, but I appreciate the opportunity, and it helps to have a resolution behind it. Okay. I believe we're at the end of the meeting here. Anything else I'm missing here before I ask for adjournment? We're good? We're good?
Thank you.
Okay, motion to adjourn. Moved. Is there a seconder? Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you for those who joined us from afar, and we will see you back here next week.